Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us for our Wasatch Wildlife Watch web training. I'm Sarah Woodbury, Communications Coordinator at Wild Utah Project. Thank you so much for joining us. We know this is a really difficult time, and we really deeply value you showing up despite everything that's going on. These critical data gaps could not be filled without you. So thank you so much for being here and for everything you do for our amazing wildlife in this area. Um, I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items and then we will introduce you to the speakers and get started. So first off, please just note that you are muted and your camera is off, so nobody can see or hear you, and only hosts and panelists can share video or screens. So if you have a question, you won't be able to ask it live, but you can navigate to the bottom of your screen and there is a Q&A button. So if you press that, it will open up a box where you can ask your questions. And you'll notice that it has an answered section. So if you just check that to make sure that your question hasn't already been answered, you can ask your questions there and we will either be answering them there or live. We have a few Q&A breaks where we'll be answering those. And then also, if you have any comments you'd like to share or resources or just things that you want to share as we're talking, there's a chat box as well. So you can press that button and chat with either just us panelists or with everyone. And then additionally, we will be sending you a follow-up email after this, and this will be recorded. So if you have to hop off for some reason or can't join us for the whole thing, you'll be able to catch up later. And we'll be sending you an email with that and other resources afterward. And then also with that, if captions would be helpful for your experience, just let us know following this training and we will send you a recording of the webinar with a transcript. So yeah, please let us know and we're happy to help with that. And then also, just with COVID-19 going on and recommendations and state orders, we want you to know that we definitely support state guidelines, and we usually recommend that folks go out and do this volunteer work with another person. And so we say this because we just want to make sure that it's someone from your household, or that if you are going alone, that you let someone know where you're going. Just we want to make sure everyone's safe. But yeah, with that, just thanks again so much for joining us. This is a really wonderful project and we're so excited to have you. We're seeing familiar names and some new names as well. Yeah, we just hope that you enjoy this and thank you so much again for joining us. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic to Mary and Austin to introduce themselves. Yeah, Mary, if you'd like to go first.
Good morning. It's so good to see so many of you joining us again on this project, and welcome to all the newcomers. Mary Pendergast, ecologist at Wild Utah Project. We are really excited to have you, and just to echo what Sarah said, there's no way we could do this landscape scale effort without the support of the community scientists. You guys are really the lifeblood of this project. So thank you again. I just wanted to make a quick note before I pass it off to Austin. If you go to the chat box right now, the very first two chats show a link to a waiver. So we're just going to be doing that digitally this year, rather than having papers changing hands, given the current situation we're in. And then following the link to the waiver, you can visit the link for signing up for curbside pickup of your field equipment. Some of you have already done that, and that's awesome. If you are able to complete that today or this weekend, that would be great, as the pickup times start on Monday. So thank you in advance for doing that online. And I think with that, I will kick it off to Austin, and I will chat with you guys. I'll be keeping tabs on the Q&A while Austin's presenting, and then some of those I'll answer just in the Q&A box, but others might be broader questions that we want to discuss with the group at our first Q&A session that starts at 10:45.
All right, everybody. Hello. Thank you so much for coming. And it is just, I cannot say enough how awesome you all are, and how grateful we are that you're participating in this project. A lot of you are return participants, and it's just great to see so many familiar names. And then I'm seeing a lot of people that are new to the project, and so welcome. Today we're basically going to be going through the same training that we would have done in person at the Natural History Museum, but instead we're doing it over this webinar. And so hopefully you get the same information. And if you have any questions, like Sarah and Mary said, you have the Q&A there. You also have the chat. But once again, just thank you so much for tuning in, and hopefully you get some good information through this training. I have to show my video here because this is the first time I've wore anything but basically pajamas for months. And so I actually have a shirt on and I have jeans. It is incredible. And so I have to share that. If you, for whatever reason, don't want to see my video though as we're going through, you can minimize it. If for whatever reason it's annoying, I do tend to be pretty animated. And so if for whatever reason you don't want to see that, you can go ahead and minimize that part on your screen. I'm also gonna turn on the little laser pointer here. All right, and we'll just go ahead and get started. So basically this is the outline for today's training. We are gonna break it into a couple sessions, and then in between each session, we might have a break or so, you know, as we go from background to past results, a small little bathroom break or something like that. But the main bulk of this webinar will take place in 2 sessions. So we'll have Session 1, which will cover background and past results of the project. And then we'll also do a little Q&A after that. And that will start promptly at 10:45 to 11. And so we might get through this first part a little quicker. And if that happens, we'll basically just kind of put the main slide back on the screen, and we will wait to officially start that Q&A until 10:45. But that doesn't mean like if you have any questions during that time that you can't like write it into the Q&A or to the chat or something like that. And we're not going to unmute people until 10:45, so that anyone that's joining us just for the Q&A session or something like that will, you know, not miss any of those potentially really important questions. And then once we're done with that, we'll move into session 2, which is kind of more of the nitty-gritty part of the webinar. That's going to be the timeline, the installation instructions, going over the data sheets. If you're new to the project, this is really important to go over and make sure that it makes sense to you. And if you're a return participant, there's not a ton that has changed, but there is a nice little section we're going to go over, basically delineating the differences between the 2 camera models we're using. And so just a quick update, we did order new cameras this year from the same company, but they just don't make the model we've used previously. And so there are some differences, and a lot of return participants might end up getting these new model cameras. And so there is a little section at the end of that installations instructions part that if you're not familiar with the Bushnell core cameras, you might want to tune in to that to get that new training on how to set up these cameras. And then we'll finish that with the session 2 Q&A. That one will be a little longer because there's a lot more information in that second session. And from there, we'll just basically conclude the meeting. And so really quick, I want to address a couple things. So this year we are having to do a different way of dropping off the equipment. And so for anyone that is new to the project, you will be receiving a lot of equipment. So it'll be a folder with a bunch of data sheets and some instructions in there. There will be some SD cards, some batteries, a few other things, and then of course the camera trap itself. And so in order to pick up all of that stuff, we will have drop-off periods at Wild Utah Project office. And so there's a link to access this spreadsheet. And what we're gonna do is kind of, if you have done any type of drive-in service over the past couple months, we're basically gonna do something very similar. Well, you'll drive up to the office and then text me specifically, and I'll need to know your full name and the make of your vehicle. And then I will come and bring the equipment out to you. and I won't be able to kind of pass it off directly to you. We want to avoid as much, personal contact as possible, especially since I'll be handing off stuff to a lot of different people. And so instead, I'll probably either put it on the hood of your car, or you can open up the back seat or something and I can put it there, or I'll just set it on the ground next to you. But we really want to avoid as much basically personal contact between me and any of the volunteers. That doesn't mean that you have to like be silent. Like if you have a question for me that you want to ask during that process, you can roll down your window, we can talk. But there's going to be no like high fives, which is kind of a bummer, and nothing like that. And so we'll go ahead and do this. But in order to do that, you do need to sign up here. And so you can just pick one of these times that work for you. It's going to be on Monday and Tuesday. If none of these times and the dates don't work, you can contact me directly and we can figure out another time to get you your equipment. All right, another thing, there should be a link in the chats section as well is the waiver form. And so like Mary said, we're not doing a physical waiver this year. We're gonna put it online. And so this is what it looks like when you go to that link. It's just your name, your email address, and then basically signing your liability away. And so you just basically check here, submit it, and then we will have that's been recorded. We're gonna try and make sure that your name is added to that list so that you filled out this waiver before you get your equipment. And so we'll check this as you come up to pick up your equipment. And if we see that you haven't filled this out yet, it can be done on your phone. And so we'll have you fill it out before we pass off the equipment. And so this is the waiver form, and I think there should be a link to it in the chat. Okay, so let's just get right into it. We're gonna start with a little bit of background for the project. This is basically trying to give you an idea of where this project came from, why it's important, and what we tend to, or what we're trying to do with these data that you're gathering. And so if you are a return participant, hopefully this will be a good refresher. If you're new to the project, hopefully this will help you answer some of the questions as to why, or the so what behind this study. And so to quickly introduce myself, my name is Austin Green. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Utah. I work in the Biodiversity and Conservation Ecology Lab, and I work for a man named Chan Shakergiolu. And that's why we call it the Biodiversity and Conservation Ecology Lab, because no one can pronounce his name. And so if you're interested in what he does, he's actually a National Geographic photographer. He's a very well-known conservation biologist. He really promotes this Facebook page here, and he has amazing just updates on what is going on in the lab, the projects that we're working on, and give you a little bit of an idea of the projects that we work on in this lab. It's all about international conservation work. And so a lot of our work does not take place in Utah. It actually takes place all over the world. And we look at conserving entire ecosystems. And so we look to see how we can get the community involved in preserving the places that they live. And so a lot of our work is community science based. We've done everything from studying the Egyptian vulture collapse in India to trapping and GPS collaring Eurasian brown bears, wolves, and lynx, to, of course, camera trapping in the Wasatch, which I think is the most impressive project we have yet. Another major collaborator for this project, and really this project would not exist without Wild Utah. And so Wild Utah Project, you've either met or you heard from Mary and Sarah this morning. They are really spearheading our community science engagement aspect of this project. A lot of the communications that you'll hear, especially before the field season starts, come from Wild Utah. And they've just done an amazing job at coordinating this project, making it work. And really behind the scenes, Sarah and Mary have been absolutely instrumental. They really have made it so that I'm able to talk to you today. If this were all up to me, this would not happen. And so Wild Utah Project has done a great job, really a virtual hand for Mary and Sarah. They've really done a great job. And if you're interested in some of the other stuff that Wild Utah Project does, I really recommend taking a look at their website. A lot of the work is based on community science and conservation. And so that's kind of their mission, is providing data, especially where there are gaps, to wildlife management and conservation agencies so that they can use that data to actually do on-the-ground conservation. And almost all of their projects are volunteer-based. It might even be all of their projects are volunteer-based. And so it's this community science aspect of really taking large-scale conservation directly to the people that need it most. We also have to thank the state and federal agencies, the Division of Wildlife Resources, the Forest Service. They've been really great in helping us get the jurisdiction to work in these areas. And they're also the ones that are going to use these data once everything is said and done. And so once we have results, we can then produce those results or give those results to these partners, and they can actually make the conservation or the on-the-ground management strategies happen. And so without them, we really wouldn't have an avenue to actually enact these policies. And so a big shout out to them as well. Another major partner is the Natural History Museum of Utah. Usually we would have the meeting at the Natural History Museum, and it's this really great venue. We always have a really awesome time, and they put together just an amazing event, both before the field season starts and after it ends. And Lisa Thompson is the main coordinator we've been working with. The Natural History Museum also has an amazing citizen science program. They have a lot of different projects that you can get involved in. Highly recommend checking out their website if you're interested in getting involved in any other projects. And Lisa's a really great person to work with. And then not only that, if the museum opens up in time before the exhibit closes, I hope you all get a chance to, or if you have already, see Nature All Around Us. It's their current exhibit that is going on. I think it started in November, and it is an amazing exhibit looking at the wildlife in Utah, specifically along the wildland-urban interface, and really just showing and highlighting the nature that we have even in our backyards. And what's really great about that exhibit is we're featured in there. We have a panel of interviews with Mary and I, and then also Andy King, one of our return participants. Big shout out to Andy. And then also just some information that we've garnered over the course of this project. So it's a really great exhibit. Highly recommend checking it out. And then Salt Lake City's Trails and Natural Lands have been completely instrumental in getting our cameras in the Salt Lake Valley. And so as you'll learn a little bit more as we go through it, a lot of our cameras are actually in Salt Lake City itself. So we do a lot of camera trapping in the Wasatch, but then a good subset of our cameras are in the green spaces of Salt Lake City because we want that comparison. We're trying to look at how humans are affecting wildlife, and we wouldn't be able to do that if we weren't able to actually camera trap in the city. And so Salt Lake City's not only allowed us to put cameras in their parks, but they've taken stewardship or ownership over a lot of those cameras in past years. And so without their help, we really wouldn't be able to get some of the great data that we've been getting from Salt Lake over the past couple of years. Okay, so now we'll get right into the background for the project. And the first thing I need to introduce is a wildland-urban interface. And that is basically, and you'll hear me say WUI a lot throughout the training. They're interchangeable. Wildland-urban interface and WUI are basically the same thing. And really, we have quite a unique one here in the Wasatch Mountains. And so we should get into a little bit what we mean when we say wildland-urban interface. And I like this definition a lot, where human development meets or intermingles with undeveloped land, because it not only addresses how development can create a wildland-urban interface, but it also addresses how humans themselves, just where they go and how they interact with an environment, that in itself can also create a wildland-urban interface. And so it's more than just where development actually meets with like a wilderness area or a protected area. It's also how the human beings that are in that area are interacting with that natural world. And so we have those two components, and that's what produces a wildland-urban interface. And just to give you an idea of where wildland-urban interfaces are located, in the lower 48 states, it's about 10% of all of the US land area. So it's not a huge margin, basically, but it's a highly concentrated area. And so although it's only 10% of the US land area, roughly a third of all of the lower 48 population lives within a wildland-urban interface. So they're highly concentrated with people because people love being by nature. And so these are areas that really draw in humans, but they're also areas that have these amazing wildlife communities. And so you need to understand how that interaction goes about in order to better protect or make sure that it's sustained through the future. And in the Wasatch, we have a really kind of stark wild and urban interface. It's very unique. And it's also one of the longest and largest wild and urban interfaces in the entire United States. And so roughly 50% of the United States total population lives within our own WUI, or our own wildland urban interface. And that is the Wasatch Mountains. It is one of the longest and continuous wildland urban interfaces in the country. It is the longest in the Western United States. And that just basically means that it goes undisturbed from the tips of the Wasatch all the way to the ends of the Wasatch. And so it's really an amazing area to study. And it's basically, you could consider it to be kind of the canaries in the coal mine. What happens here could really, if we can understand what's going on here, we can understand what's going on in a lot of different areas in the country. And just to give you an idea of the traffic through the wildland urban interface we have here, roughly 9 million people visit the Wasatch every single year. And according to the Forest Service, that is the highest annual visitation rate throughout the entire country. And so we see more people visit the Wasatch than any other national forest. Granted, this is an incredibly large national forest, and so you do have to take that into account. But just that number, 9 million, that is equal to all 5 of our national parks combined. So we see a ton of people coming into the Wasatch, and that can have an effect on the wildlife, and we need to understand that effect before we can do any type of conservation work. Add on to all of this that Utah, especially over the course of the last decade, is one of the fastest growing populations in the United States. In 2018, we were the second fastest, but in the last decade, we've been the fastest growing population in the entire United States. And so this traffic is only expected to increase. And so if we can understand how those increases are affecting wildlife here, that can really help us nationwide or even globally. This is an example, or basically how a geographer would look at the wildland urban interface here. What you see here is the Salt Lake Valley right here in gray, and then the Wasatch, or the central Wasatch, and this is really our study area. And so you can see this outline in black. That is highlighting these 7 major canyons that we're focusing on. This is City Creek Canyon all the way down to Little Cottonwood Canyon. And what you're seeing here is basically just how crazy this area is and all the different land uses that we have in this one small study area. And so we have everything from really low housing to no housing to almost completely protected areas like Red Butte Canyon right here, to townships like Immigration Canyon, to an entire metropolitan area like Salt Lake City. And then you see these little intermixes throughout the rest of the areas. And so we have our wildland urban interface, but we also have these intermixes, and that is where I'm getting at. It's more than just the development aspect, it's also how people are interacting with the environment. Is it high enough traffic to really create these different layers? And what's really great about this stuff is that we basically have our own experimental system set up. It's this really awesome natural arena to look at data across these different areas and do some comparative analysis. And that really allows us to see how a community that may not be affected by humans at all changes as we go from one canyon to another. And so the basis for this project really came through this Mountain Accord process, which Wild Utah Project was a big contributor to. And what the Mountain Accord process was, or what it is basically this plan for conserving the Wasatch in the future, both economically and the natural resources that we have. And through the Mountain Accord process, it was a big process where we had NGOs, state and wildlife agencies. We also had policymakers and politicians get involved. Everyone came together and basically made up this action plan for the Wasatch. And what that resulted in was a lot of questions. So data gaps are very, very numerous here in the Wasatch. We don't understand a lot about what's going on. And the mountain accord process was able to help us understand just how much we don't know. But we didn't have the resources at the time to then use that information and start addressing these questions. And so when we took a look at the mountain accord process, we said, this would be an excellent dissertation project. We have all these questions we need to have answered. And one way we think would be great to answer it is through science. And so to just kind of highlight some of the questions that the mountain accord really brought forth, where we don't really have a good idea of abundance or trends through time. We don't know how a lot of species in the Wasatch are doing in response to all these different pressures year after year. We need those trends. If we can understand their trends, we can get a better idea of which species are susceptible, and which are not. We really have no idea how the Wasatch has affected, or the human influence in the Wasatch has affected the behavior of these different species. We want to understand if certain species are able to adapt. How has that affected their population trends? Can we look at that connection between them? And then we also want to know how it's affecting habitat usage. We want to know what areas all these different species are using, where are they found throughout the landscape, and how are they using that landscape? That is really important to us. And it's really flipped on its head when you then say, let's look at it in response to human activity. And so that is really kind of, this connection forms the backbone of this entire project. We want to look at these wildlife data in response to human activity. And so this posed a really difficult challenge at first. We didn't know how we wanted to study it, because we knew we had to get a ton of data, but we didn't really know the best way to do it. And so we decided on camera trapping. And what's great about camera traps is they produce some awesome photographs. And so you cannot do a camera trap training without showing some of the best photos over the last few years. This is one of my all-time favorites. This is actually a Salt Lake Tribune front page article photo. And so I had to show that one. We got the moose coming right at the camera. We always get action shots of deer. They kind of steal the show. There's very few cameras that won't pick up deer. Coyote are also pretty numerous here. I like this one. It's a pretty awesome shot of a coyote. And then this is one of my only non-night vision photos of skunk. And of course, when that happened, we have 4 of them all in a row. So I, of course, had to throw that on there. But yeah, so we are using camera traps for this. And we'll get a lot into why we're using camera traps and the functionality of them. But, you know, just to kind of go over some major points, they gather a ton of data. And they do it in a really great and non-invasive way. And so when we ask this question, why are we using cameras? That is really the 2 things that hammer this home for us. They're non-invasive and they gather tons of data. And it's really important that they're non-invasive because we are trying to understand the behavior of these animals. I spent the first year of my dissertation in northeastern Turkey, where I was trapping bears, wolves, and lynx. And that was physical trapping. And so we had to capture the animal. We had to put it to sleep for a sec, and then put a GPS collar on it so we could understand its movements. And this gathered some really great data for us. But you do, through that process, realize that there is an effect on the individual animal that is captured, and it does alter their behavior a little bit. And more studies are coming out showing that. And so we didn't want to go about it the same way. We wanted to do it a different way so that we could understand their behavior in a very natural setting. And we didn't want to have any type of invasive procedures. And so cameras really open up that avenue for us because they are just out there sensing what's going on, but in no way, shape, or form affecting different animals' behaviors. They might startle a mule deer every now and then, but that's nothing worse than a twig breaking in the night. And so that is really one of the main reasons why we're using them. Another one is they gather tons of data. And so this is just an example. I've lived here my entire life. I've done a bunch of hiking, a bunch of camping, always trying to be out in the backcountry. I've seen 2 of these mountain lion in my entire life. One of them was dead, unfortunately, and the other one ran by so fast that I didn't really get a great look at it. But in the 2 years that this project has gone on, we have nearly 300 different photos of mountain lion. And so that hopefully gives you this idea of just how awesome camera traps are at getting tons and tons of data. And something as elusive as a mountain lion, where they're hardly seen in person, we get tons of photos of them on the cameras. Okay, and so that kind of leads us into how we want this data that we're gathering, or these data that we're gathering, to affect on the ground conservation. So like I said, the Mountain Accord really does a great job of identifying the data gaps that we have in this area, but it didn't have the best idea of how to address those data gaps. And so we have kind of built a framework to get from the data gaps we have here to on the ground management conservation strategies. And one thing we really are interested in is addressing that through ecological study or through scientific research. And so that's the first part of this project. And that really forms the backbone of my PhD dissertation. And so to get into some of the questions that we're interested in, the main one is basically how can we manage the CWR, the Central Wasatch Range, that's really our study area, wildlife community in the face of all these different anthropogenic influences, or basically how do wildlife and people interact in the Wasatch? And one of the main things we want to do is simply understand how they're using the habitat in the Wasatch in response to human interference or human influence. So we want to understand if they are varying their habitat usage in response to humans. If so, how? To what degree? Do we have more adaptable or less adaptable species in this area? Can that identify certain animals that may need more or less conservation attention? Another thing we want to do is kind of on to that same question, identify behavioral adaptations that some of these species have that allow them to inhabit this area. Are some species better at adapting to this than others? Are there really stark differences between different communities or different canyons? And if so, has that affected behavior in any way, shape, or form? Are we forcing certain species that wouldn't like to hang out with each other, hang out more so? And if that is the case, what is that doing to the wildlife community? So we really want to understand those behavioral adaptations. And then finally, last but definitely not least, we want to identify some key habitat areas in the Wasatch. We want to know across this entire landscape, are there areas we should be focusing on, whether that's increased protection, or are there areas that might not be as important and we can continue developing here because we have this increasing population, we know people are coming in there. How can we best manage this ecosystem moving forward? Are there ways that we can connect different important areas that facilitate dispersal or to facilitate movement between them, and therefore have a little bit of more leeway where we can develop in this area? What's the best strategies that we can adopt to make sure that this community remains thriving in the face of all this increasing human disturbance? And then that is where you come in, or community engagement. We want to address these data gaps. We want to actually affect on the ground conservation. We know that scientific research can help us get there, but with the amount of data that we need, we simply can't do it alone. And that is really where community engagement comes in. And that also gets at this question of lots of data. Like I said, cameras can gather a ton of information on all these different species. We can get a ton of info on mountain lion that we wouldn't be able to do without cameras. But in order to set those cameras up and in order to have them monitoring, we need a lot of help and a lot of help. The most I've ever been able to do before this project was roughly 20 to 25 cameras or so. And I felt pretty good about that. That was a good effort. But we knew that in order to address these large scale questions, we would need an order of magnitude more studies or more cameras in order to make that happen. And so big shout out to our last 2 years of community scientists. You people are amazing, absolutely incredible. And it blows not only my mind, but everyone else I talk to. And I talk about the effort and the people that have been involved in this project. It really is something special. And it has grown into just really inexplainable just effort. From hiking 16, some odd miles to get to your camera, camping out in a different area to get to your camera. And then not only that, setting up nearly 100% of all of our cameras This is something that just does not happen. A lot of these projects, even the project I based Wasatch Wildlife Watch on, they get maybe 50, 40%. And we're up where it's 95 to 98% participation. So we have simply the best volunteer community. I know this without a doubt. And without you, this project would not happen. So thank you all so much. I really hope that you tune in for the past results section so you can really see what we're doing with all of that info. But thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. This has just been an absolutely incredible project. And just to kind of highlight how awesome this project's been, in 2018 was our pilot year. We really had no idea what we were gonna do and how it was gonna work out. We just wanted to see if we could make this project work. We set aside roughly 200 cameras or so, and we were covering about 1,000 square kilometers. We then got this big training organized and gave all these cameras away, and then really just held our breath. We had no idea what was gonna happen. And it was amazing. It was absolutely incredible. Like I said, we had over 90% participation. We got data back from a ton of these cameras. And we now have this data set just from 2018 that we've been able to start answering some pretty amazing questions with. And so I hope to share that with you guys in a little bit. But the 2018 pilot season wasn't just a pilot year. It was a year that we're actually using that data because you all did so amazing during that first season. 2019, we then upped that to about 235 different stations, and we had some monitoring going on after the field season, so it was a pretty ambitious year. And I was expecting maybe a drop in participation. I was like, there's no way we could replicate over 95% completion, and we did better. And somehow we approached the 98 to 99% volunteer participation in 2019. And because we gathered so much data, we're actually still working on entering the data from 2019. We're pretty close, but I hope to basically do the same analysis I've done with 2018 with 2019 as well. But this data set's even larger than our 2018 data set. So we're really excited to see what we get from that. We added a lot more Salt Lake City locations in 2019. We also were able to cover a little bit more of these wilderness areas. So that extra data is going to be great for comparative analysis. And so then in 2020, why not? Let's just up it even more, because I am now convinced that this is the best volunteer base that exists. And so because of that, we're just going to up it more and more every single year. And so in 2020, we're going to be more like 250 sites. We'll have 246 active for the field season here, the summer field season. And that is what you'll be participating in, is the May until August field season. We'll have roughly 250 sites set up. But then we're also going to keep a lot of those sites up from September to November. And so during the field season, you'll get updates on that if you want to participate. If not, that's totally cool. But we'll keep it roughly 50, 55 sites or so up through November. And a lot of that will be studying effects of that wildlife overpass in Parley's Canyon, and then also a lot of nationwide collaborations. So that's why we'll be keeping them up. And then these sites that are along the Jordan River are now permanent sites. So they will be 25 sites that are active year-round, and will never be taken down. So we're really excited to get that year-round monitoring as well. And this is in response to another nationwide collaboration that we've been able to join because our data set is so great and because our volunteer base is so great. And these cameras will be used to answer a bunch of different questions on how wildlife are interacting in different areas of the country. And so we're really excited for that as well, to now have these extended field seasons with a subset of these cameras. And then just to throw on, we're also expanding the number of sites for this actual field season. All right, so let's just go over some of the best photos from the last couple of years. I love this slide. This is kind of our baby animal slide. We've got, mom and her fawn right here. We've got these kittens, which big shout out to Chantel if you're listening. This is your photo. It's still to this day one of the best kitten photos I've ever seen. We've got the two bobcat kittens. And then, of course, we've got our baby coyote. Both of these were in City Creek Canyon, so that was pretty impressive. But we've got some really great photos throughout the years. This is still to date. This was back in 2018 when we captured this juvenile northern goshawk. Still to this day, one of my all-time favorites. We don't really catch raptors a ton, but this one really liked to hang out, and we got some great shots. Great shots, action shot of coyote. This was one of my favorite from last year. This is a pregnant female mountain lion, and it's actually a fairly late stage in the pregnancy. And so it was really incredible, and it's not 100% validated, but we did see in the same camera, roughly towards the end of the rotation, another female mountain lion with a kitten. So who knows? But this is one of my all-time favorites. And then, of course, we get so many action shots of deer. We've got to throw some of those on there as well. I really like this raccoon photo. It is so difficult to get a good raccoon photo. They are always running around. They are always blurry. And so even though this isn't the best quality, when I saw it, I had to put it on there. It's so difficult to get them. This is actually a fairly old photo from the season right before the 2018 field season. This was up in Red Butte. We got this amazing photo of a mountain lion trudging through the snow. One of our best photos of American black bear here in Lambs Canyon. We do get black bear. A lot of people don't realize just how many different species we have in the Wasatch. So this is one of my all-time favorite photos. And then this coyote photo, I mean, is just out of this world awesome. And this is also from last year. I believe it was up in the Cottonwoods, and it's just walking around with a severed deer head. Doesn't really seem to mind too much. And so that is one of the grossest and coolest photos we've had over the years. And then I really liked this photo because it highlights that there's a bunch of wildlife in Salt Lake City. So this is actually just in a park in Salt Lake City. But we've also got our domestic cat, which we are looking into a lot more moving forward. Cats seem to have quite an impact on this ecosystem, especially when we look at their interaction with different mesocarnivores, or just basically smaller sized predators. They seem to be having some type of interaction there. And so I like this photo of these deer really eyeing this cat as it's walking by. And then, of course, like I said, raccoon photos are few and far between. They're hard to come by. So anytime you get a good one, you got to post it. And we've got a couple wrestling, again, in a Salt Lake City park. So some other really great photos from the Salt Lake City area. All right. And so that kind of concludes the background section. Mary, I'm going to ask if you think this would be a good time to take a quick break, or if you would like to kind of go directly into the past results.
I would say if you want to go right into past results, and then we'll take a break. We'll probably get to the Q&A session earlier than intended, so we'll take a break before we start Q&A.
Awesome. All right, so then we'll go ahead and get started. We'll go right into these past results. I actually think this is incredibly important. And since I've been bogged down in response to COVID-19, I have been able to do a ton of analysis on all of these data that we've been gathering for the past couple of years. And some of this has really proven to just have some awesome results. So I thought I'd share that with you all now. And so we do have a few past results. We're now working up formally publishing these and really kind of moving forward with this part of the project where we're not just gathering data for data's sake, but we're using these results to affect on-the-ground conservation, to actually contribute to some sound scientific work. This is really an exciting part of this project. And so the first thing I wanted to talk about is we are trying to produce these spatial maps, or these spatial tools for these different conservation organizations. And so this is just one example. We've done this for 14 different study species. So we're studying anything from about the size of a skunk to a moose. And we're really focusing on mammals because, as we'll get into it in a little bit, these cameras are really great at picking up mammals because they require both heat and motion to trigger a photo. And so mammals are really great for that because they're large-bodied enough to trigger the motion sensor, and then they have a heat signature that the cameras will pick up as well. And so we have these different maps for a bunch of different mammal species. And what you're basically seeing when you look at this is a map of our study area. We have Salt Lake City right here, and then we have the Central Wasatch Range. And every single one of these blue dots is a camera station that was set up, active, and gathered quality data through the 2018 field season. And what you'll notice is that some of these sites have these little yellow circles around them. That represents a site that detected whatever species you see up here in this right corner. So in this case, this is a mountain lion map. And so every site that has yellow in it is a site that that a mountain lion was seen. And the opaqueness or the darkness of that circle represents what we call relative abundance, or it's a site usage probability. So it's an estimate of how many different individual mountain lion are using that site. So the greater that estimate, the larger that value. And so that will then produce these darker circles. And so that, just looking at that alone, can really kind of show you where they tend to be. But then what you can do is a kernel density analysis, or basically an analysis of all those different points. And if you congregate them, you can start to identify the most important habitat for each of these different species. And so that's what we have right here. You have areas of really high importance. If you look up here at this legend, the lighter the color, the more intense, or the more likely you are to see that animal using that habitat. And then the darker the colors, the less likely you are to see. And so I really like just throwing in I-80 here. This is just a really good example of what I-80 might be doing to a lot of these different communities. I hope you can kind of see these two core habitats that we have, these two really big patches, and what seems to be separating them is this nice little interstate that we have running through our study area. And so that kind of gets us into this idea, though. We can identify areas of really high habitat importance or really high relative abundance. These are areas that are vital to this species conservation. These are areas where these species are hanging out a lot, and they're using this habitat a lot. We can also identify areas of potentially low relative abundance. They're still using these areas, but not at the same degree as these other two core areas. That doesn't mean that they're not important. It just means that they're using them to a lesser degree, which actually can pose some questions. How can we increase their usage of these lower relative abundance areas? And one thing you can then use from that is, if you look down at this other legend right here, you'll see that all of these sites seem to be enclosed in this nice little gray circle. That is a high probability core habitat estimate. So what that's saying is that this is the core habitat for mountain lion in our study area. And in order to persist at its current levels, this habitat needs to remain intact, which is exactly what we're looking for. These are the types of things we're trying to identify, is core habitat for each of our species. We can also identify non-critical habitat for mountain lion, which might then produce some type of ideas for where future development might be better suited. And as opposed to developing these areas, we could think of these more non-critical habitat areas that come into the Wasatch. It doesn't mean that they're not vital during the different seasons, but at least during the summer season, this is an area that's not highly used by mountain lion. And if we can then overlay that with all of our other species, we might be able to identify areas that are just not critical to the vast majority of the species in this community. And then finally, we have these management interest areas where we have these really nice populations and we have these really nice habitat usages, but we see that they're cut off or they're severed in some way. And so this can really pose a question to these management and conservation agencies. Are these areas key to potentially facilitating movement between these two places? And if we can do that, then if we're protecting these areas and facilitating movement through here, that core area might get a little smaller for us, which is what we're kind of looking for. Can we identify ways to make the habitat better so that as influence and human activity increases, we're still protecting the same number of individuals with a smaller amount of land? This is when you overlay a few species together. So this is the same type of map, but what you're looking at here, these are predators. So these were just carnivores that we overlaid. You can then identify areas that are important to entire communities. And so once again, we see these little pockets of high usage right here. And then we see that they're all kind of broken up in some way, and they do need some type of connectivity between them. But what you'll also notice is that red butte right here is incredibly important to so many species, which would make sense. It's the most protected and pristine ecosystem that we have in the Wasatch, in the entire Wasatch. And so it would make sense that a lot of species are really hanging out there, and that's our major source population and might be the most important single area in the entire study area. But what that then does is makes all of these other areas look a little more inconsequential. And so when we want to then focus in, let's say we want to focus in on what's going on just south of I-80, we know there's important habitat there. It might not have the same qualities as Red Butte, but we know that's important habitat. Can we just focus in on them? We can. And so we can just zoom in on those areas and really start to identify areas within those southern canyons that are more important than others. And we start seeing those higher elevations. We also see actually some pretty good connectivity between these canyons, which is important for us. But we could even go a step further and look at individual canyons themselves and identify what's going on within the individual canyon. And so this is some really great information that we're getting. It's really helping us make some really awesome decisions on the ground. And that is what we're hoping for, is identifying important areas, not only at the entire study area level, but even at the canyon specific level as well. So this is just one more of those maps. This is if you take all of our species and overlay every single capture for the entire season. This is what you end up getting. And once again, Red Butte really blows up, but we also see the importance of these southern canyons as well. But what this really highlights is I-80's effect on, what looks like to be a pretty strong effect on our communities that we're seeing here. There's actually quite a bit of fragmentation there between these two really high levels of habitat usage. This is kind of another way to look at that exact same thing. This is the same measure, relative abundance, across these different canyons. So this is basically the estimate of different individual animals that would visit a site across the entire study area. And what we see is these canyons are organized geographically. So we have City Creek, Dry Creek, all the way down to Little Cottonwood. And the really big thing that sticks out when we look at it this way is the importance of Red Butte Canyon. Red Butte is just vital to the entire community. It really represents the area of importance throughout our study area, and it also seems to be having an effect on adjacent canyons. And so we do see kind of a spillover effect where what's going on in Red Butte is having an effect on its adjacent canyons. And I really like this stark contrast, because if you imagine Parley's as being I-80 and you look at the difference between this community here and this community here, it really goes to show you the difference between these two. These should all be relatively similar. If we were in a completely untouched situation, all of these canyons would have relatively the same habitat. And so we would expect these bars to be on the same line. And these differences that we're seeing, that is really important to notice. And one of the big ones is the effect that Red Butte's having and the potential effect that I-80 is having, stopping that spillover from reaching these southern canyons. This is another one. I really like this graph actually, because this is showing the power of the measurements that you guys are taking at the individual sites. And so this is a graph of mean species richness. So this is the estimated number of different species that visit every single camera trap. And so each one of these points is an estimate for that actual camera trap. And what you see here, this site development index, this is actually the measurements that you took in 2018 at each site. And so when you were calculating or estimating the amount of traffic that you saw, or the amount of pet sign, or everything like that, this is what those estimates and those measurements were going to do. And what we see is a pretty stark change. And what's great about this is actually the first time in any camera trapping or any mammal study where site level development was included in analysis. And so a lot of the times when you're looking at development, you'll be using some type of GIS layer that has a certain resolution. And that resolution is, anywhere from 30 meters to 100 meters or so. And it's just an estimate for what's going on in the entire area. No study has actually looked at right where the camera's at, within 50 meters of the camera, what are these actual development indices? And you can't do that without a huge force of people going out and gathering that information. And so those measurements that you're taking at the site are really kind of proving to be vital to what and to how we understand this ecosystem, because we see a pretty stark change here in the amount of species that we see at each site in response to this development. This is another way to look at that kind of same information. But instead of species richness here on the y-axis, we're looking at a community similarity index. And what that is basically the proportion of mammal species that are seen at any one of these individual sites in response to a reference site. And so this reference site is our most undisturbed site in Red Butte Canyon. We feel that that most represents the community that we should see in the Wasatch, that it represents a very healthy and thriving mammal community. And so we use that as our reference. And if we can then compare all other sites to that reference site and then overlay it in response to the site development index, we once again see this pretty stark change where our mammal community, the community that we're seeing in these different camera traps, is changing pretty drastically as we go from a less developed to a more developed area. We can also do this for actual individual species. So this is all community-wise. So this is how all of the species interact. This is how individual species interact to these same things. So once again, you see that site level development right there. And then what you're seeing here is the probability that this species is going to use that area. And you can see how it responds to these site level developments. The blue line is the estimate. The gray lines are confidence intervals, or basically the error that's associated with that estimate. And you can see that some species are negatively associated with site development, like moose and elk. We have coyote that's not really affected much at all. And then we have our species that are positively affected by how much a certain site is developed. So how much trash is in an area, or how many human footprints, or how often pets are in the area. That actually is kind of positively correlated with these two species, which would make sense. We see these guys in more urban areas, and so that would make sense that we see that response. We can also just look at environmental factors. So this is elevation. So this is just how high a specific camera is and how likely you are to see a specific species. We see the mountain lion. We actually see them at lower elevations as often as we see them as higher elevations. We see skunk at more lower elevations. All of these are making sense. Coyote at higher elevations tend to be more prevalent, moose, elk. What's really great about these data is they're finally answering these exact questions. What habitat are these species using? How likely are they to be in a specific area given the habitat that we have? These are the questions that we really need answered. And this is another way to look at that same graph. What you're seeing here is the variable that we're looking at. So this is that site level development that you calculated. This is dog presence, so whether a dog was seen in the cameras, and this is domestic cat presence, whether a cat was seen in the camera. And what you'll see here is this yellow, or this gold band right here. This is the community response. So once again, if we aggregate all of the different species and we see how they're affected in the entire study area, this is that response. And the y-axis here is a coefficient, or basically, is it a negative association or positive association? No effect. What you see here is just the effect of that variable on this species. And so if it's below 0, it's a negative effect. If it's above 0, it's a positive effect. And if it overlaps with 0, if these bars overlap with 0, there's really no statistically measurable effect. And so what we see is that the site development has a net negative effect on the entire community. It's not statistically significant, but it is a net negative effect. And then we look at it at this species level, we can see which individual species are actually negatively affected by the development at a site, which ones are a little less developed, and so on and so forth. And so that's with this graph. I really like this dog presence because this was something that was kind of worrying me. I like to go hiking, and I like to bring out either my parents' dog or friends' dogs. And so it was kind of nice to see that there's really a net 0 effect of dog presence. Didn't really seem to have an effect on any one of these species. But another interesting finding is that cats do have a net negative effect on a lot of the species that we see. And so this is a community effect, and it's actually statistically significant. So basically, as an entire mammal community, the presence or absence of a domestic cat has a pretty stark effect on what we see and how likely we are to see different species. And interesting enough, the one that's statistically significant is bobcat, which would make sense. It would make sense that cats and bobcats are competing on this ecosystem, but it's kind of cool to have that information really for the first time showing that. Here's another one that a lot of people have actually asked me about, so I thought I'd address it. This is the effect of foot traffic measured at the site. And so if you had your camera trap set up on a trail, we took that subset of cameras and we looked at the effect of hiking traffic on all these different species. And that's about as net zero an effect as it can be, where the community average is right on that zero line. And there's huge overlap between positive and negative. And then we see that no species in our study area really shows any type of negative or positive trend with hiking, which really corroborates data that's been gathered in a lot of different areas. So that's good to see that a massive amount of hiking traffic in the Wasatch really isn't having too much of an effect on the wildlife. This is a really stark difference that I wanted to share. So if you participated last year, you heard a little bit about Kelsey Barnick and her study. So she was looking specifically at the differences in our mammal community if we just look on the north and the south side of I-80. If we don't consider anything else and we just look on the north and the south, what do we see? And so what you see here is that species richness estimate. So it's the estimated number of species seen at each site. And then once again, that community similarity index. So the proportion of species that we see, how much is that shared with our reference site, which in this case, again, is Red Butte Canyon. And we compared just the differences between the north and the south. And these were not at a large spatial scale. So this is simply, anywhere from 100 meters north of I-80 to 500 meters north of I-80. So there really wasn't a ton of difference between the habitat in the north and the habitat in the south. And we wanted to make sure that that was the case so that we could just compare the differences between being on the north and being on the south, being next to Red Butte and being next to those more southern canyons. And we see huge differences in both species richness and community similarity. And really the only thing we can attribute to that too is where their location is across I-80. So that was a pretty awesome finding as well. Kind of sad as well, but a pretty stark difference between these two communities. Okay, so that's kind of wraps up the first session. We've really finished pretty quick. And so we're gonna hold the Q&A at 10:45. But I think what we'll do until then is take a quick break. If you didn't get breakfast or anything like that, this would be a great time to do it. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask before the actual Q&A starts, where we unmute people, ask them in the Q&A section right here. I'm gonna hang out for a little bit and answer some of those questions. And so feel free to, talk with me in the chat or in the Q&A. But yeah, we're gonna take a break then real quick and we'll pick up back at 10:45 with the Q&A session. These are really awesome questions, by the way. These are questions that, are like pretty awesome to get at. Jacob asked, are we going to be able to see these, the data analysis after the season is over? Mary answered that one, but I just want to quickly reiterate. With the pipeline that we have, data from 2020 won't be analyzed until about 2021 or so. The biggest bottleneck in the project is getting all the photos entered into the database and then formatted into a position where we can start analyzing those data. And so just like with 2018, we really didn't start analyzing it until later in 2019. We were trying to figure out the kinks. We now have a better pipeline in place, and so we're about a year behind. So the data from 2019 will be analyzed this year. The data from 2020 will be analyzed next year. And so you'll be able to see the results from your participation this year in 2021, hopefully. There's a lot of questions about the wildlife bridge. So Susan asked, is there any data yet on the I-80 wildlife bridge and what species are using it and how frequently? We actually just started monitoring the wildlife bridge as the main people that monitor it in November. And so before then, they were monitored by UDOT and the Division of Wildlife, but their cameras broke. And so they asked us to set up cameras there instead. So we just barely started setting up cameras there. And so we're gonna start looking at that data very soon. But right now we don't have any of that in-house. It's all still out there being gathered. But there are some really interesting questions that we're hoping to look at. We see this difference between the north and south of I-80. And so we're really interested in looking at the directionality of the traffic across species. So are more species moving from the north to the south across the bridge, or from the south to the north? And does that change across species? So that's some of the things we're looking for. We're also hopefully trying to get some information on how these maps change in response to how traffic across the bridge is changing, whether or not we start seeing some of these gaps filled in or stuff like that, potentially shining some light or some evidence towards the efficacy of the bridges. So that's something we're looking into. Robert asked, since there are no tracking abilities in regards to species camera captures, how is it determined that the camera captures are not repeats of the same animal? This is an excellent question. This has actually been a topic of intense research for a long time. And so basically what we do is each site is separated into temporal replicates, or every single day a camera is monitored. That is a repeat survey. And so we only survey once per, we only survey every single day. And then within that day, there can't be two photos of the same species within an hour that are considered independent. So two things have to happen. So what you're getting here is daily estimates and then replicates of those daily estimates, and no estimate can have less than an hour in between species identifications, if that makes sense. And so that's how we control for whether or not it's the same individual or not, is by putting these constraints on what we consider a replicate survey and what we consider an individual animal. But that's a really great question, and it really kind of harps at what we've been researching for a long time, basically. So awesome question. Tally asked, do you account for bias in camera site location when modeling a species habitat? For example, if you have a uniform grid of cameras, would you expect to see the same results? And Mary and I have actually talked extensively about this. This is the hardest single source of bias that we can address. Whenever you try to do any type of spatial analysis with discrete points or just fixed locations in time, it can be really difficult. And that's why most spatial analysis is done with GPS collars, because you get that full range. Theoretically, every single individual point on the landscape is available for sampling, whereas with camera traps, you have discrete locations, so you can only sample at those locations. So the best way to address that is to basically decrease the spatial resolution, or the amount of detail that we can use in our analysis, and that's by putting a buffer around each individual site. And so when you do that, you're assuming that the area of your buffer, this habitat around that buffer, is very representative of the site that you're actually surveying. And so what you see at your survey site applies then to the entire buffered region. And if you make that buffer large enough to capture in the camera's distances apart, then you can fill in the entire map. But it just makes it so you have to basically have lower spatial resolution, which means you have to have more data points, which is another reason why we had to have so many cameras on the landscape to get a good estimate, because the more cameras you have, the smaller that buffer has to be. And then another one was, do you think the geological differences between the canyons play a role in habitat or species that are observed? I do think there is enough difference in geology and also just like elevational profile between the north and south to could potentially address this. Well, the best thing we can do is use basically the highest elevation camera site in Red Butte as our reference, but then also looking at the elevational profile and the habitat profile for all of these species. It does incorporate the entire study area. And so theoretically, they all can persist throughout the entire study area. So being able to just reference them to the most untouched canyon was what we thought would be the best movement or the best move there. And so that's why we used Red Butte as reference. But there is the potential for bias because there is some differences in elevation that you can't really control for, but also geology. So that's a really good question. And it is something that you have to think about, but I think that the differences are so stark that it really goes to show you that there's more than just kind of environmental factors that's going on there. So Jay asked, are there any discussions about a wildlife bridge? Mary, you're free to jump in if you know of any of these discussions. I personally do not know if there's any discussion about wildlife bridges in Lower Parleys.
So Austin mentioned the Mountain Accord process, and some of you who keep tabs on these sort of things might be aware that that's kind of transitioned and been taken over by the Central Wasatch Commission. And so They are working closely with UDOT and the municipalities to kind of talk about proper prior planning to deal with transportation planning that's happening in the canyons. And so that is something that's part of the conversation. And data like you all are helping us gather will help those people who are making those decisions make more informed ones and actually use wildlife as one of those variables that they're considering. So in the absence of these core areas and potential connection points or pinch points that we're able to get at by analyzing data gathered by this project is really going to mean that wildlife are part of the consideration in that planning. And so I don't think there's anything exact locations on the table at the moment, but it's definitely something that's getting discussed. But we need data to help us decide where those locations ought to be. And I think I just wanted to take a second to point out the preliminary analyses that Austin shared they are very preliminary, right? So it's based on a year and in some cases on a little bit of 2019 as well. And so we'll be continually sharing preliminary information with you all because we think that's just really important for you to see year to year how we're kind of piecing together a puzzle for what the landscape looks like in terms of habitat use for wildlife as we get through each year's data. But once we have 5 seasons worth of information gathered and all those more robust statistic analyses will be done, then we'll really be at the point where we have a mapping tool and a data tool that will be able to inform on the ground landscape planning. So we're really kind of sharing with you all these sneak peeks as we get each bit of information gathered. So all of this is still fairly preliminary that's being shared. I also just wanted to point out, you all can see the Q&A box and see questions that are answered. So most of these answers are in there. If any of you want to revisit the answers. And then in terms of the wildlife overpass, I've shared a few links where you can actually see video of wildlife using the overpass. So that's kind of fun if you want to take a look at that in the answered section of the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mary. Yeah, and so then we'll just keep going down here. Pete had a really good response to Robert's question as well. That is another way that we can make sure that individual animals are not double counted, is if they do have any type of distinguishing features, we can use that as a way to differentiate between different individuals. But another thing to keep in mind is that we don't have to actually estimate exact abundance here. And so it's not vital that we have individuals. It's more a rate of usage at an individual site, which we then assume will carry over to the habitat quality of that site. And then Pete asks that it's good to see that there's a minimal effect on animals, but we also see less hiking, or the minimal effect of hiking on animals, but we also see less hiking in Red Butte. So why isn't that? There's kind of a contradictory thing there. And why don't we think that hiking had an effect when the obvious, most pristine canyon has no hiking at all? And my guess is that when we run these models, we include all of the different variables that could affect these different species. And what typically happens when you do this is the ones that are important indicators show out, and the other ones that may be important if they were run just as the only indicator, they kind of get washed out. And that's what I'm guessing happened here, is that the differences between Red Butte and the other canyons is more explained, or is better explained by the variation in development and dog presence and cat presence and all these other things that we don't see in Red Butte, more so than the actual hiking traffic. And this is actually a big concern that a lot of researchers have, is that if you run a model that just is looking at one variable at a time, you're going to get like false positive, basically saying that something's significant when it really isn't. And so if we ran this model with just looking at hiking traffic, it probably would have shown that a lot of animals were affected by it, but that's because we didn't control for all the other things. Whereas when we control for all the other things, hiking traffic actually gets washed out, and we see that it's really actually not that important. But that's a really great question. Jessica asked, are the cameras set up in the same spot each year? Yes. Every single camera that is repeated is set up in the same location. From year to year, we do add locations, and those ones are new. But then moving forward, we always repeat the same location so that we can start getting those temporal trends that we want to start looking at. All right, so then we're just going to address some of these more, the questions that have just come in. We'll go a little bit over, but that's totally okay, because as you guys saw with the first session, we ended pretty quickly. So I think taking some more time to address these questions is definitely worth it. And anyway, so another question is from an anonymous attendee. The effects of dogs, cats, trails on wildlife in an area is interesting. Any thoughts on how different forms of trail use or recreation might affect wildlife in an area? This is an excellent question, and it's difficult to hash out. And so a lot of the analyses that we'll be running will be the first time that any type of this analysis is ever ran, because we have this fine scale information that's gathered at the site itself. And so really, I'm not entirely sure. This is kind of an open question. I don't really have a hypothesis on how different forms of the trail, or whether it's a dog walking trail or non-dog walking trail, will affect it. Especially since we saw that hiking in general and dogs in general didn't have much of an effect. It's difficult to think that the combination of the two might, but it's an open question. It's something we're going to look into. Yeah, and it might have to be done by another PhD student because I will be working on something else, but it's definitely something that we want to look into. It's a really kind of just interesting thing. Yeah. And then Justin asked, is there any concern with these wildlife corridors that it may lead to an increase in predators in the area and lower certain species populations? And that you're a student, that's awesome. There's always, to kind of answer your question, Justin, there's always a concern that if you're working with large predators, and I've done this, ever since I started grad school, working with large predators, that you have to be considering human wildlife conflict. You also have to consider potential trophic effects that might happen. In this case, I'm not too worried that predators are going to decrease certain prey populations, and that this is kind of the typical natural ecosystem that we'd see. And so instead of like completely depleting certain populations, I think it would be more of a natural control, which would actually be better for the ecosystem in general. But the big question that I get asked a lot that I have to be really sensitive to it is the potential for human wildlife conflict if you're now building corridors that might facilitate movement of a large predator like a cougar. And so facilitating it, potentially getting them closer to humans is always an issue. But, I think what this research really goes to show is that cougars do an incredible job of avoiding humans already. We have such a healthy population in the Wasatch, and the vast majority of people don't even know where they are, that they're there at these high numbers. And so my initial thoughts would be that it might even be better to basically concentrate them in these wildlife corridors and areas where they're not as affected by humans, and then let them continue to avoid us in their own ways, which they've done for a very long time, and they're really quite good at it. But yeah, no, that's an excellent question. It is something we always have to consider. Marianne White, good to see you, Marianne. By the way, is there a significant amount of wildlife migration on the bike path at the mouth of Parley's Canyon? I honestly don't know. I know that we have one of the cameras set up at that specific site, but I don't remember off the top of my head what we have going through that site. If you're interested, you can actually go onto the eMammal page for this project, and you can download the data from that specific site if you know the site name. And you can see the individual photos that were captured there, at least for 2018, not for 2019 or 2020, but for 2018, you can actually view the photos from that camera yourself if you're interested in seeing what an individual camera captured. And then Jacob asked again, long-term, will this data be used to coordinate with state agencies on closing vital habitat to human winter usage or other times of the year? That's a really good question. We're still trying to figure out the best way to continue monitoring throughout the year. Because right now, all of these data have to be taken with a grain of salt because they represent a snapshot that might not be 100% indicative of what's going on throughout the entire year. Because we're only surveying in the summer. And so the data that we have, the analysis that we run, is specific to their summer habitat and their summer locations. And we don't have a ton of information on what's going on in the winter. Like I said, we are trying this is the first year where we're trying to keep a subset of cameras up for a longer period of time. And then we will have those cameras in Salt Lake City, but it doesn't really get at the question of what's going on in the Wasatch during the winter. We'd like to just think of a way to do this because that's a big component that we're missing. But currently it's just something it's really difficult to ask you to do this 15-week commitment, which is a big commitment, and then ask for you to then buy snowshoes or something like that and continue it into the winter. And so, yeah, it is a interesting question. If you have any thoughts on it, I'd be happy to hear what you're thinking. But yeah, no, it's something we want to look into. We do want to see how this changes so that we can coordinate with the state agencies on what's going on in the winter. But right now, we just really don't know. And then Wendy asked, "Hey, Austin, very excited to participate again. Excited to have you. Will you be factoring the possible impact of COVID-19?" Yes, this is an awesome question. So I haven't really mentioned this, but because of the data set we have and because of the amazing participation that we've had over the course of the last 2 years, we have been invited to join 2 different nationwide and actually continental-wide study groups that basically collaborate with one another to investigate large-scale habitat questions or large-scale research questions across the entire United States. And so we've joined 2 of these. One of them is just a consistent assessment every single year of the mammal community across the entire United States. And we're contributing to that now every single year. The other one is through this group known as the Urban Wildlife Information Network. I highly recommend that you check them out if you're interested. But it's a collaboration of, I think, like 30 some odd cities across the United States, where it's basically just like a research collaboration where you pose a question to the entire group, and then anyone that wants to contribute data to that specific question can contribute. And the reason that makes sense with your question is that one of them that's actually been proposed this last cycle is looking at exactly that. What is the effect of decreased human traffic and what they're quoting as dead cities? How is that affecting wildlife in these areas? And so we will be looking at that, and the data that you're gathering for 2020 will be directly used to answer that question. Are we seeing an increase or an uptick in wildlife activity? Because you'll hear a lot of like anecdotal stories about that right now, but there's no hard evidence to show that that's the case. But we are going to be looking into that and seeing if there is any effect. You know, and with that, I highly recommend you look into the UN project, because there's a bunch of other things that we're just contributing data to that I didn't mention. So there's a lot of research questions that are being posed through that group that all we do is contribute data for to basically make their estimates more robust. And so there's a lot that's coming out of this project that I really just can't talk about because it's just so fast and there's so much. But if you're interested in UN, you want to know the type of questions that we're looking at through that collaboration, feel free to reach out to me and I can kind of give you the 411. But yeah, one of those is definitely the effect of COVID-19. Awesome. So that looks like that was the end of the questions that we have. Feel free to still pose them. We're going to have another Q&A session. And then Mary and Sarah are also combing through the chats, combing through the Q&A. And they are going to start basically continuing to monitor those and answer those. And then we'll take a longer Q&A session at the end of this webinar, and we'll address all of the questions that you have. But for now, just for the sake of everybody's time, I want to get into the second session here, where we're going to talk more about the nitty gritty. So this is going to be more of a lecture type thing. You know, I apologize for that. I'll try to keep it as lively as possible. But this is the really important stuff. If you're a newcomer to the project, this is the actual training portion of the webinar. And so this will be really important for you to pay attention to these things. And we're going to outline basically how to go from potentially a camera trap novice to someone that can set up a research grade camera. So let's just get right into it. I'm going to go ahead and put on the little laser pointer again. All right, and then cool, we'll go through the timeline first because this project is based on rotations. So there are some things that you'll have to do when you have your camera. You'll have to be setting them up in different rotations, and that timeline can sometimes get confusing. So we're just going to walk through the entire timeline for the project, what you're expected to do during each week, and so that you have a very good idea. And then I'll also have some resources that I'll share with you that you can use as you're going through the field season in case you forget for whatever reason anything that we're talking about right now. And so let's basically just pull up this map. This is
our study area. We have Salt Lake City and the Central Wasatch Range right here. These are, you're going to either be assigned a camera in the Central Wasatch. So you'll either have a camera that is incorporating some of these sites, or you'll have cameras that are located somewhere in the Salt Lake Valley. And that really depends. If you're a newcomer, you're going to be assigned a camera based on your preferences. If you are coming back and you requested the same camera trap, you have that same camera trap. If you requested a different camera trap, you were given first preference on the new sites that were available. And so I think everyone, there were about 4 people, I think, total that did not get their exact preferences. But I think this is the best we've done as far as giving everyone the cameras that they wanted. And so hopefully that reflects what you guys were wanting when you signed up. And so if you have a Salt Lake City location, some people get bummed out by this because they're like, here's this metropolitan area. There's no way there's going to be a lot of wildlife going through here. And, you know, it can kind of be discouraging. But when you really take a look at the areas that we have and that we're surveying, they're pretty incredible green spaces, and they're really nice natural areas. And wildlife have found a way to navigate these areas, and we get a ton of different wildlife that use the Salt Lake City locations. And so they're actually pretty incredible. One of my favorite parts of this project has been going out to these places and seeing them for the first time and being like, wow, how have I been missing this the entire time I've lived here? And so there's some really great Salt Lake City locations. And the Trails and Natural Lands Division has done a really great job of narrowing down the sites that they're really interested in. And I feel like we've got a really good group of Salt Lake City locations. On the flip side, if you have a Central Wasatch location, you're probably expecting something like this, where it's super pristine, super beautiful, and you're going to have tons of wildlife that go through your cameras, which could be the case. You might get a really awesome camera, like the Red Butte cameras are in a nice secluded area. You might get one at the higher elevations. It's really nice, secluded, great hike. But even within the Wasatch, we have quite a bit of habitat variability, and you do see quite a bit of change, and you'd be surprised at how those things can affect the different wildlife that we're looking at. And so you could have a location in Emigration Canyon where it's a township, and you might not see certain species, or you might see other species that you wouldn't expect to see in the Wasatch. You know, we've got the ski resorts. We've got a lot of variability going on, which is both the best and the hardest thing about this study, is that because we have this incredible matrix, we can do all these awesome comparative analyses, but also because we have this incredible matrix, no one way to set up a camera is the best way. There's always going to be something that happens. There's always going to be tricks to the trade that you're going to learn over time. And so being able to adapt to the situation that you're given is going to be really important. So just again, to visualize what that looks like geographically, this is just another example of the variability of habitat that we have in this area. And really no single 2 camera sites are going to be exactly alike, which is awesome for us on an analysis standpoint, but it can make setting up the actual camera kind of difficult. So what we're going to try and do here is lay out the fundamentals, basically, and then hope that you apply those when you're actually going out and setting up the camera. And so, like I said, a lot of variability in the different camera sites. And because of that, they're going to pose their own challenges, but also their own really awesome rewards at the back end. So here's the expectations. So with this site, with this study, we are expecting a 15-week commitment. And that doesn't mean that you're going to be doing something every single week during the entire field season. It doesn't mean that you're going to be working 40 hours a week, not at all. But it simply means that if you sign on and if you take a camera, you are expected to be participating in the project for that full 15 weeks. And how that's sorted out is in 3 different rotations. And so what you'll do for each rotation is you'll obviously set up the camera, but then halfway through that rotation, you'll check the camera to make sure that everything's okay. Can't stress enough how important it is to check your camera. And then you'll take it down at the end of the rotation, and you'll either move it to the next rotation, or if it's the final one, you'll take it down for the last time. And you're going to do that for all 3 rotations, and each rotation is 5 weeks. So that's why it's a 15-week commitment. You've got 5 weeks for rotation 1, 5 weeks for rotation 2, so on and so forth. And so through that process, since you're going to be completing 3 different stages, for each rotation, you're going to be expected to fill out 9 total data sheets. So 3 setup data sheets, 1 for each rotation, 3 check data sheets, and 3 takedown data sheets, 1 for each rotation. So let's go through a hypothetical scenario, and so we can get better, just kind of hash out what that timeline is going to look like. Let's say we were assigned a camera that had these 3 central Wasatch Range locations. The vast majority of cameras that are assigned have sites that are in pretty sequential order, and we usually start with the lowest elevation and then work our way up to the higher elevations as the rotations proceed. And that's simply for ease, for your purposes, because a lot of these sites, they'll still have snow at the higher locations. You know, roads might still be closed. And so having those lower locations first makes that easiest, and then doing that slow progression up to the highest locations or the farthest locations as the seasons get warmer. That's the goal with that progression of those rotations. So if you were assigned a camera and you had these 3 locations associated with that, your rotation 1 would be right here, your rotation 2 would be right there, and your rotation 3 would be right there. And so this is kind of the main table. This outlines your responsibilities for every single major week. You'll notice that there are 9 important weeks to put on your calendar. These are the weeks where you're expected to do some type of task with your camera. And so you'll see that you'll be assigned 1 camera. That camera will be assigned to 3 different rotations. Those rotations will have a name. And then at each one of those weeks during that rotation, you'll be expected to complete some type of task. And so that first week, it's obviously installing the camera for each rotation. The 3rd week, you'll notice that these are all done in kind of 2-week periods. The 3rd week is the check, and then the 5th week is the takedown. So these are all important dates to remember. And you'll also be given these dates in your packet, so you don't have to write them down or anything, but these are the important dates. You're given an entire week to complete each task. And so it's not that it has to be done on a specific day. It can be done on any day within that week. So let's outline that in more detail. So let's say we have rotation 1 and we have canyon site number 1. Week 1 is going to be your setup. So that's when you're going to go out and actually set up that camera. And that is May 4th through the 10th. So this study, the field season starts May 4th. So you'll come and grab your equipment, but you're not expected to set up the camera until May 4th. You're more than welcome to set it up earlier, but the technical field season does not start until the 4th of May. And I highly recommend for these setup dates to give yourself more time, especially if you're new to this and you don't have the same location as you had last year. Give yourself more time for these setup weeks. They're the most difficult week. Finding the best site for the camera is the hardest part about this study. And so giving yourself a little bit of extra time to complete that will really go a long way. The next week, you're not expected to do anything. You just let the camera gather data. And so we're trying to limit our traffic to each individual camera as much as possible. We don't want to disturb the area if we can help it. And so for that 2nd week, you just have to let it do its thing. And then you return during the 3rd week to complete your check. And so that check's going to be done between May 18th and May 24th. And so basically what that will entail, we'll go through the actual data sheet in a little bit, but that'll just basically be checking the camera. You know, are the batteries still doing okay? Is the SD card not going crazy and taking a bunch of photos? Has someone moved it out of the way? I cannot tell you how much this check has saved data from being used when it wouldn't otherwise have, because plenty of times someone will get to their check and it's either been moved or disturbed or the wind blew or something like that. Vegetation, especially for this first rotation, vegetation has a nasty habit of growing like crazy during this time. And so you might set up a camera in a place you think is an awesome spot. There's not a ton of vegetation. You go back for the check and it's completely overgrown. I did this last year myself. I set up a camera in Red Butte, thought I was in a great spot. I came back and I couldn't even find the camera for a while because the vegetation had grown so much in that small stretch of time. And so these checks are vitally important to ensuring that we're gathering high quality data and that we can use that data from your camera. If there's anything that happens during the check, it doesn't mean your camera's out, not at all, especially if you can fix it when you get there to check it. During the fourth week, you're not expected to do anything. Once again, it's just basically letting the camera monitor. And then during that fifth week, you'll go ahead and take down that first rotation. So rotation 1 ends June 1st, but you're given all the way up until the 7th to take down that first rotation. And I can tell you, and anyone can tell you, that during these weeks, you're going to get a lot of context from me, especially if I don't hear from you beforehand. I'll outline that a little bit more in the coming slides, but it's always good to get these cameras down during these weeks, or I'll start contacting you like crazy. All right, so this is just kind of an outline. Like I said, we have rotation 1. That's the only one we're focusing on. Setting it up in May 4th, checking it May 18th through the 24th, and taking it down June 1st through the 7th. All right, then we're gonna go straight into rotation 2. So once you take down rotation 1, it's now time for rotation 2. And so week 6, so notice that there's not a 2-week period between takedown of rotation 1 and setup of rotation 2. There's only a 1-week gap between these. And so this is the only spot where you're expected to do something on subsequent weeks, where you don't get a week off in between. And so that setup starts the week after June 1st through the 7th. So setup for rotation 2 is on week 6, which is June 8th through the 14th. I've put in parentheses here June 1st through the 7th, because a lot of people, especially people that have participated before, or if they have cameras that are fairly close to each other, they make an entire day out of setting up or taking down rotation 1 and setting up rotation 2. And they want to do that on the same day because it makes sense. You're roughly in the same area, and you're already out. You are more than welcome to do that. And so that's why I put that there. If you want to set up rotation 2 on week 5 because you've taken down rotation 1, you are more than welcome to do that. And so you get theoretically 2 weeks to set up rotation 2. There's just not a gap in between the takedown and setup, if that makes sense. Then during week 7, once again, you're not going to do anything. You're going to let the camera monitor. Week 8, you're going to go back for your check, the 22nd through the 28th, nothing week 9, and then take down July 6th through the 12th. So the July 12th is the last day for rotation 2. Once again, just kind of beating a dead horse here. June 8th through the 14th is the technical setup week, but you're more than welcome to do it during the takedown week for rotation 1. Check right here, check 22nd through the 28th, and then take down the 6th through the 12th. And then rotation 3 follows the exact same protocol, where we have a setup where we get 2 weeks, and you'll notice that this is the same as the takedown week for rotation 2, so you do have that option. And then you check it, and then the last day for the field season is August 16th. Now, halfway through the field season or so, I will contact you, and I will just simply ask if you are willing or are interested in monitoring either your camera or a different camera from September till November. So like I said, we're going to try and keep up about 50 cameras or so through November, before the snows really start to fall, especially in the valley. And so I'll be contacting you for that. But if you want to just do the summer field work, that's great. And your last day is August 16th. All right, so that is the timeline. I think that we're actually going to be better on time this time. So instead of taking a break here, we're just going to continue to go through this, and we'll be a lot closer to hitting that actual mark for the Q&A during session 2 instead of having a break in between. So let's just go straight through this. So that was the timeline. Now we're going to go through probably the most nitty-gritty part of the entire training, and that's the installation instructions. So that's actually finding a site and setting up the camera. And we're going to go through every single aspect of this so that you feel prepared without having that in-person training. So this is all going to be based off a document that you'll see in your folder. So everyone's going to be given a camera installations instructions manual, and that's in your folder. It's a 10-page document that is basically, we're highlighting it from start to finish right now. And so none of this needs to be like taking notes or anything like that. You're going to have all this information. I'm just going to go into the ambiguities of it and the specifics of it right now to kind of help explain what that document's saying. And so this is the first thing you'll see when you open that document up is before going into the field, we're going to expect you to have everything ready. And that's just because I can't tell you how many times I've gone out to set up a camera and I'm missing something and it just ruins the day because I have to go back and grab it. And it's just, if I already have these plans to set up all these cameras, it's always good to just have everything ready before you go out, so that, you know, when you're there, it's all just a breeze. And so before going into the field, can't stress that enough, do this all before you go. You'll be wanting to have your actual trail camera unit with you. And so that's not just the camera itself, that's everything that comes with it. And so to just kind of highlight that, you'll have your trail camera, which will look something like this. If you have a core camera, one of the newer ones, it will look different, but they all function the same way. You'll have your batteries, they'll be in the camera, but you'll also have those backup batteries that we're going to give you. You'll have the SD card. That they're all in the folders this year. Instead of putting Rotation 1's SD card in the camera, I thought it would be best if everyone just does it themselves to get used to it, especially since I'm not going to be able to train you in person. So all the SD cards will be in your folder. And then you'll have your keys and locks and your security case. So this is what represents your entire trail camera unit, is the case, the camera, SD cards, batteries, keys to the lock, and then the lock itself. So there's your lock and keys. Really important, a little note here. It's pretty important to remember not to store food in the same pocket that you store your trail camera. And the reason for that is that we do a lot every single year to make sure that we descent all of our camera traps. And so we want them going out not smelling like humans in any way, shape, or form, or at least as much as we can help it. And that's just, or any type of food or anything like that, because we don't want to attract or repel any of the species. If we were looking at just one animal during this study, like just puma, we would probably change this protocol. But because we're trying to look at an entire community, we want to make sure that we are not biasing the estimates that we get by potentially attracting certain species to our camera traps. So if you do take food, which I highly recommend that you do every time you go out there, simply store it in a different pocket of your backpack. That's more than enough to keep it from getting attached to the camera. And this comes from, this comes from work that I did in Turkey. When we were actually trapping animals, you had to actually boil the traps in like a forest soup for weeks and then apply a pretty hardcore wax to them. And so whether or not this is super important, I don't really know. It's just ingrained in me to descent all of your equipment before you go out. And so that's why we're gonna basically just put that stipulation on there. The next thing you'll need is a GPS capable device. So this is just anything that can take a GPS point. You can use a handheld like Garmin GPS, or you can use your phone. And I've actually, over the years, I've stopped using my expensive handheld GPS because I actually think my phone just works better. And the apps that have come out, the free apps especially, are just better at this point, I think, than a lot of the GPS that you can just buy through Amazon or anything like that. And one of those, so like I said, you'll need one of these, either a phone, smartphone, or a GPS, a handheld GPS. If you don't have a smartphone or a GPS, you can let me know. I think I have 9 of these Garmin handheld GPSs that I can rent out to you. And so I am more than happy to do that if you would like one of those instead. If you use your phone, and this is kind of the recommended way that I'm suggesting that you do this, I highly, highly recommend, if you already have your own GPS app and it works, go ahead and use that. That's awesome. If you don't, or if you're not used to it or you've never done it before, there's a great GPS app. It's called Gaia, and it's 100% free. It's I know it works for iPhones. I think it works for Androids as well. If it doesn't, there is Backcountry Navigator that works really well for Androids. But Gaia is really just an awesome program. They even have an online interface. So if you're really into mapping, you can even do some type of GIS analyses through Gaia. It's an incredible program. And so if you are going to download Gaia, or if you want a refresher on how to use it, let's just walk you through it. When you download the Gaia app, this is the first screen you're going to see. Go ahead and just either click skip or start exploring if you want to have them go through a tutorial. If you click skip, it'll take you to the disclaimer. Go ahead and select I agree. And then it'll say, this is actually vitally important. I've had a few people accidentally do the wrong scenario here. It's going to ask if you want to allow Gaia GPS to access your location. With a lot of apps, I always am like, don't allow or whatever, only allow while using the app. It's actually important in this case that Gaia can access your GPS, especially when the app is on. Because if it can't access your location, it can't give you a GPS fix at your location. And that's vital for this camera study. So it's important that you at least select only while using the app. Please do not select don't allow, because then it's going to have all types of trouble accessing your location when you're out there. And so it just makes much more sense to allow it to access your location while you're using the app. When you do that, it'll then take you to this screen. This little red lightning bolt is zapping out this red marker you'll see because it's not going to actually be present when you first open up the app. You'll just see this arrow, which will be representing your location. And so you'll just have the arrow. And let's say you then navigate to your camera site and you find an excellent position for it and you're ready to set up the camera. You'll then select this button, which will center on your location. And so this might take a while. You might see your arrow bouncing all around the screen as it's trying to pick up your GPS. You can even go into the trip and you can watch the resolution of the GPS point if you're interested. And this is a really great way to basically make sure that you have good resolution. But once it finally settles in on your location, then you'll go ahead and you'll click this button to add a new waypoint. So you'll click the add waypoint. That'll pull up this screen. And you're going to want to select this option, the add waypoint at my location. Once you do that, it'll pull up this screen where you'll actually fill out the information for the GPS point that you just took. So right up here, you'll give it a name. I highly recommend that you use the name of the site. And so you'll see on your folder, each site will have a name. I highly recommend that you put the name of your site when you record that GPS point, and then you'll go ahead and click save. Once you do that, you'll now see that the sun has illuminated on your little red point. And so it will actually exist, and it should be right where your arrow is. So it should look exactly like what you see on the screen right now. And then to access that point, to actually record those GPS coordinates on your data sheet, you'll access that point you just took by clicking the save folder. That'll then take you to here. Here's the location that you just put. You'll go ahead and select that, and that'll pull up your GPS point. And there you'll find your GPS point. It'll also give you an altitude. I've verified this with GIS, and it's actually fairly accurate. So if you want to include the altitude, you're more than welcome to. I mean, we'll get elevation from your GPS point using GIS anyway, but I always like comparing the differences and seeing how well they basically record altitude. So you're more than welcome to include it. And then when you include your GPS location, we want you to go out to as far out as it gives you. So these are decimal degrees, and each one is an order of magnitude more resolution. And so we want you to go out as far as it gives you. It'll give you 5 decimal places, record all 5 decimals. All right, the next thing you'll need after you have your trail camera unit and your GPS capable device, you'll also need a fieldwork folder. So that's your actual folder that you're gonna take out into the field to assign all of these data sheets. And so in each one of your folders, there should be 9 data sheets. There should be 3 SD cards. There should be that 1 camera installations document. The placard is actually something that may not be in the majority of your folders. And that's because the laminating service that I use through the University of Utah is closed because of COVID-19. And so I wasn't able to make a ton of placards. So you might not have the placard in your folder when you go out to set up your location. I'll talk a little bit about what the placard is in a sec, and the alternatives that you can use instead. But that's just kind of the situation that we're in right now. I wasn't able to get placards for everybody. You'll have a dry erase marker and you'll have a pen. And you'll be able to use the dry erase marker is usually used for the placard. It can also be used for your alternative. And then the pen, of course, to fill out the data sheet. Please check beforehand that you have everything you need. I can't say this enough. I am terrible at doing this. And I can't tell you how much of a downer it can put on a day if you accidentally go out with not all your equipment ready to go. All right, the next thing is hiking equipment. We do have some recommendations for you. Of course, they're not 100% set in stone. You won't be, in trouble if you don't do this. And this is a really good time to talk about some social distancing issues with COVID-19. And so we really highly recommend that you hike with someone. Latest data I checked showed that accidents that happen in the backcountry in any way, shape, or form, about 99% of those accidents are in association with the lone hiker or a lone person. And so just going with someone can make you much more safe. However, in our current situation, that does not mean that you can go with someone that you don't currently share your house with. I don't want you to break any of the current social distancing rules here to accompany or to go out with someone that you don't actually live with. The preferred method for this moving forward is that your hiking partner is someone that lives with you or is in the same household. But we understand that if you have to go out by yourself, and if it's required that you don't live with anybody and you can't go out with anyone else because they're not in the same household, at the very least, please contact me and let me know where you're going. And so I can check in with you to make sure that you're safe and that you've gotten back home after you've completed your check. The good thing about the Wasatch is actually in a lot of these areas, we have pretty good service. I don't know why I just looked out at the Wasatch, but we have pretty good service. And so you can contact me while you're out there. But at the very least, check in with someone. It doesn't have to be me, but at least check in with someone before you go and once you get back. And I wish that we could enforce everyone going out with at least one person. I wish I could go out with you if you can't, but because of the current situation, we can't do that this year. And so if you have to go out by yourself, please check in with someone, because that is the main thing here. We want to make sure that everyone's safe. These are some other things to keep in mind. Maps, GPS, compass, you'll need a GPS. So that's actually a requirement. Always good to have extra clothes, especially in that first rotation timeline. You might be in 60, 70-degree weather here in the valley, and then you'll go up to your location in the Cottonwoods, and who knows what the temperature is. And so really good to have extra clothing. Always good to have food and water with you. A first aid kit, never a bad idea. Headlamp or flashlight, especially if you're going anywhere near dark, and especially for those setups, because they do take longer than you might anticipate. And so always having some light out there is a good idea. Matches and fire starting a kit, never a bad idea, especially for those colder months. Any type of multi-use camping tool, Letterman is great. Sunglasses and sunscreen, I highly recommend this. I have now become a baby and I won't go out without sunglasses and sunscreen. It's absolutely vital to me. Water treatment device, we got a life straw, that's always really awesome. Something that can be capable of making a loud noise, especially if you're out by yourself. You want to make sure that you can get a hold of someone, or you can know or notify that you're in a certain spot. And then any type of general storage device. I always walk around with a like Tupperware container in my bag. Couldn't hurt, so might as well have it there. All right, so now you're ready to go. You have all your equipment. You're out in the field. We're going to talk a little bit about now locating the best place for each trail camera anywhere in the field. And so you're going to be given on your folder, we'll have the GPS locations for all of the cameras that you've been assigned. With that GPS location, it'll take you to some random spot, because a lot of these cameras were assigned with the stratified random design. And so because of that, sometimes the actual camera location, like the GPS point itself, and I highly recommend just throwing these GPS points into your phone before you go out so you can get a general idea of the area. But a lot of them are in some really weird spots where they might be like up here on the ridge or something like that. And because of that, you're not expected to set up the camera right at that exact location. You are given a 100-meter buffer in each direction to set up your camera. And if you don't know how to see how far away you are from a location, if you go to your Gaia GPS app and you select any given location, you can then do the track function on that location, and it'll tell you exactly how far away you are from that spot. And you're given 100 meters in each location to find the best spot for the camera. That might seem like a lot, and it's the research recommended buffer, but 100 meters comes up pretty quick, especially if you're in a really kind of dicey situation, or if you're in like a urban area. So this is why it's so difficult to find a good spot for the camera, because you're really given a limited radius to find the best spot. If you are in a location where 100 meters just isn't going to cut it, you are welcome to go outside of that, but you need to contact me afterwards, and I need to do some analysis and some calculations on the back end to control for that variation. And so if you have to go out farther than 100 meters because you couldn't find a spot, that happens. I get it. I've done it before. I just need to know beforehand. And roughly, I need to know the distance between that camera site and where you actually set it up. All right, so with that, once you are at the location and you've found your 100-meter buffer, you're gonna choose the most wildlife-friendly site you can find. So once you're within that vicinity, like I said, you're gonna wanna look for anything that is funneling wildlife activity into it. So I mentioned this during the Q&A with Tally's question when she asked, how do you associate a larger area with a discrete point in time? That's what we're trying to do with this information. And so we're trying to say that the information we're gathering from this camera site is indicative of what's going on throughout the entire area surrounding it. And the only way to do that is to concentrate on areas where any wildlife in that area are going to find themselves. And so wildlife are going to follow their resources to survive. And so creeks are always a good idea to put stuff on. Wildlife trails are really easy to find in the Wasatch, and they're really highly trafficked. And so those are great spots. Even roads are not terrible spots, like dirt roads specifically, not like a fully trafficked road, but like dirt roads are pretty good. We control for all of these things, so it's okay if you put a camera on a dirt road knowing that you're going to get more predators than prey, because that's actually something that we include for it, that we are trying to analyze. And so it's okay if you find yourself having to put it on a dirt road or a hiking trail. All of that's included, and you mark that on your data sheets, and we control for that, and we're actually trying to look at the differences between those. And so that's what you really want to look for, these types of things that are going to funnel wildlife. Intersections between trails, creeks where they meet a certain trail, dirt roads, wildlife. These are areas that are funneling wildlife through. That's where you're going to want to focus. Here's really some really good examples from, looks like 2018. This is a hiking trail in City Creek. Camera was just set up right on the hiking trail because the vegetation was way too dense on both sides, and it was a great location. It's in a perfect spot. Here's an example of setting it up on a wildlife trail. Once you get out there, you're gonna really be able to recognize wildlife trails pretty well. This one's like a super easy one to spot, which is why I picked this camera. But here's a great wildlife trail. We've got our little badger here walking along there. But this is another excellent example of a great spot to focus your camera on. You're going to want to try to determine the travel path whenever you set up a camera, because you are limited to the amount of area that your camera can actually see. So you want to maximize the amount of area that your camera can see in relation to the amount of area that's going to be covered by wildlife. And so what that looks like in person is this. This is a figure that's in your camera installations instructions. But let's imagine that we have this animal travel path. This could be a hiking trail, a road, a wildlife trail, doesn't matter. You want to be able to identify the travel path. And so for a trail, it's just along the trail. And then what you want to do is position your camera diagonally along that path so that you maximize coverage of that path. So what you want to do is, if you imagine there's a little cone of detection coming out from your camera, you want to get that as much of that travel path in that cone of detection as possible. On the flip side, we do not recommend putting up the camera trap perpendicular. So if you've seen a lot of camera trap images, especially ones where they're looking at like tigers or something that can be individually identified, you'll usually see a photo where it's a side view of the animal because they've set up the camera completely perpendicular. We don't want that in this situation, because even just looking at this figure, you can see how little amount or just basically how much of this animal path you are missing by simply setting up the camera perpendicular as opposed to diagonally. So this is a great example of one that was set up perfectly. It's diagonal along the path, and you'll notice that we pick up the female mountain lion right here. She's the one that triggered the camera, but we noticed that because we had it diagonal and we're viewing as much of it as possible, we see that she's with a kitten that's trailing her pretty far back. If we had the camera perpendicular in this case and she triggered it and we got a photo of her, we would have missed that, that kitten. And this is actually something that I should talk a little bit about, in 2018, we had to reject data from about 12 cameras. These were cameras that were set up and gathered data correctly, but for whatever reason, the setup was not conducive enough for us to analyze that data. And in about half of those cases, it was because they were set up perpendicular. In 2019, that wasn't the case, the vast majority of the cameras we used. But in the 2018 data set, we did have to reject about 10 of them. And half of those were because the camera was perpendicular. And so even if we were triggering animals with that camera, we have no idea what was actually going on at that site. And so we couldn't use that information. So here's an example of what not to do. This would be an exact example of kind of what you would expect to see if you would set up the camera perpendicular instead of diagonally. This is what you would have gotten a photo of the female. You would have no idea what's going on. And it's really just, there's not a lot that this camera can see. And so it's missing so much of the area that you could be looking at simply by tilting the camera the other way. All right, so you do want to consider the sensor's range and field of view when you're out there. In the Wasatch, we have a lot of rough terrain and some areas of pretty thick vegetation at times. And so usually you're never going to get to a point where you can see more than the camera can actually view. These Bushnell cameras were selected for this study specifically because they have the largest field of view and the quickest triggers. So they gather the most data. And so with that, their typical range is about 110 feet that they can detect things from. So really with that, all you want to think about is if you're setting up a camera, let's say on a wildlife trail or something, and the only tree around there is 200 yards away that could actually view that wildlife trail, you don't want to pick that location because the camera can't actually see what's going on the wildlife trail, and it's too far away, so it won't be able to detect anything. More often than not, that won't be the case. You'll actually have the reverse issue to deal with, where your camera won't go far enough, or your camera will go too far, or basically the site that you found is really small as far as how much the camera can see, where basically anything that's going on more than 5 or 10 paces away you would miss because of the vegetation or the terrain. And so more than thinking about, getting somewhere where the camera's too far away, you want to think about where the camera might be too close. And so you'll be doing what's called a detection distance calculation. And when you do that detection distance calculation, you want to make sure that you're at least 5 to 10 paces away, that your camera can at least detect something that's 5 to 10 paces away. If not, you want to consider a different location because there's not enough that the camera's viewing to get a good snapshot of what's going on in the entire area if you're only looking at 5 to 10 paces worth of stuff. So once again, this is a great location. It's diagonally along a road, and there's way more than 5 to 10 paces of area that camera can see. And so if you imagine, you got 110 feet out here, this is what the camera can actually pick up. That's great. Another thing you want to really think about, so half of those cameras were rejected. Half of those rejected cameras were rejected because they didn't have, they were too perpendicular to a site. The other half were rejected because they were pointing too far up or too far down. And so this is really important that we consider the terrain that we're setting up our camera on. And specifically, especially with the Wasatch, we're in a ridiculously sloped area. You want to make sure that you're going along the slope when you set up a camera. So here's a really good example. In a sloped terrain, the camera should be angled and parallel to the ground. That's really important. So if the ground's running this way, your camera should be parallel with that. If it's perpendicular to the tree like this, if you just set it straight up on the tree and you're on a sloped area, you can see how something, imagine this is the size of a skunk, one of the larger species or smaller species that we're looking at. If your camera's set up right here, there's a good chance it'll walk right underneath it. And the way we were able to figure this out if cameras weren't basically getting animals is simply by the height test. If we were picking up moose, right at their breast height and we couldn't see anything below it, then we knew that we were missing anything else that wasn't that big. And so those are why those few, it was only like 4 or 5 cameras, but anytime that you have to reject data like that, it's always kind of rough. And so always good to remember that it's vital that you have your camera going parallel to the ground so that you can see anything that's specifically walking down low. So green smiley face for good, X, red X for bad. Here's a good example of how to angle your camera down. Really, it's just shimmying it. Wendy White and Jim Franson have an excellent way to get around this. They actually built a little like wooden wedge that they put in between that they take out with them. It's a fantastic idea. If you're at all handyman and you want to do something like that, I highly recommend it. But basically finding something, usually while you're out in the field, twigs, anything like that, to put between, between the camera and the tree, that's the best way to angle it. And then that leads to finding a suitable tree for the camera. This seems dumb, and I promise you that I wouldn't go over it if it wasn't important. But really, the tree that you pick can dictate a lot about what goes on at your camera site. And so finding a suitable tree is super important. What you want to kind of look for, this is a good example, is a relatively straight tree. We'll talk a little bit about why that's important, and you also want to find one that has a pretty thick diameter, at least roughly the diameter of the width of the camera. And that's so that it's not swaying in the wind like crazy and you're getting a bunch of photos. And so there we go. It's reasonably straight. The reason you want it reasonably straight is that no matter how much you try, it can be done. I've done it plenty of times, but if you set up a camera on a slanted tree, your camera will be slanted. You can try all you want to jimmy rig it, but more often than not, when you come back for the check, that camera's moved back into that slanted position. The reason that's so important is that motion detector goes out like a cone, if you can imagine it like that. And if it's slanted, that cone is tilted. And what can then happen is animals can then walk through that tilted part of the cone and not get detected. So although they're right in the view of the camera, the motion detector is going to miss them because instead of being like this and picking up that animal and then taking a photo, it's slanted like this, and so the animal goes right underneath it. So if you have a super slanted camera, this has never happened for us. That's another thing we have to watch out for, and if it is super slanted, that's another reason why it might be rejected. I keep throwing out all these things that it might be rejected. Like I said, in the last 2 years, we've rejected a total of 10 camera sites. It's very, very uncommon. But these are just things to watch out for so that yours isn't one that potentially has that happen. But like I said, it's slanted tree usually results in a slanted camera. If you're a setup pro at this point and you know you can jerry rig it and tie it all good, and if it's the only option, go ahead and give it a shot. But if you've got a couple locations in mind and one of your trees is straighter than the other, just go with the straighter tree. It's gonna make your day a lot better. Another one is you want to kind of try and avoid looking for areas with direct exposure to the sun, specifically areas both like north or east and west that look directly into the sun during sunrise and sunset. This is for two reasons. Reason number one, it's going to result in a ton of photos. And when I say a ton of photos, I mean like literally thousands of photos, tens of thousands of photos. Then that's because the sun's going to beat down on the vegetation in the area. That's going to trigger the camera's heat sensor. And then anytime that vegetation moves, that's going to trigger the camera's motion sensor. And so the slightest amount of wind directly in the sun with any type of grass results in constant triggers. So you really want to avoid direct exposure to the sun as much as possible. It also weakens the heat sensor because if the heat sensor is constantly on, it's going to have a really difficult time differentiating between when body heat actually walks by and when it doesn't. And so keeping that in mind, that's not always the case. It's not always possible. You can set it up in the sun. These cameras were made to be outside, so they can handle sun. But if you can help it, having the camera face north or south really reduces the number of photos that the camera takes that are missed or blanks. We set up the camera at knee height. I don't specify any type of height requirement. Knee height is our goal because if you look at this photo, we got Yao and Shaq and then a photoshopped image of Kevin Hart in there. Pretty big height difference. Hopefully it's not representative of the height difference we have in our volunteer base. If we have someone that's 7'6" and you're not playing basketball, I don't know, man. But what you can see is when you look at the heights of their knees, they're actually roughly similar, even at such a difference like this. And so that's why we go with knee height. It's the best way to just kind of make sure that we're all relatively in the same spot, give or take. And that difference, that variation in where the actual camera is set up height-wise really gets washed out when you have 234 of them. All right. So like I said, we are going to cut it fairly close to the Q&A session. And so let's just go straight through it. Bear with me. We're almost done. We're going to do step-by-step fieldwork instructions here. So let's just go straight through it. Step-by-step camera placement and installation instructions. Like I said, you want to choose a location that maximizes the probability of detecting wildlife. We've already gone through that. Here's a wildlife trail in Red Butte Canyon where we identified the animal's travel path. We put the camera diagonally along that. Here's I think this is either Parley's or Immigration Canyon. This is along a creek bed. You identify the animal travel path. You put it diagonally along that. Perfect locations, really great setups. Here's some other ones. A hiking trail. Identify the travel path, diagonally along it. Identify the travel path. Here's the service road. Put the camera diagonally along it. Like I said, find that straightest tree, and that diameter really helps. If you put it on something like a gamble oak that's really swaying in the wind, you might come back to a camera that's all the way down at the base of the tree because it's fallen down, or it's taken thousands of photos because the wind was blowing. And so really you want to make sure that you're taking that in consideration. And then you also want the camera to be a little bit back. So if we go through this, we don't want the camera to be directly on this hiking trail or directly on this service road. You want it to be a little bit back from that. And that's because the way these cameras are designed, the highest sensitivity for each camera is roughly 2 meters away from it, if that makes sense. And so you want to be a little bit back from the area that you're searching. You don't want the tree to be like right smack in the middle of it, because it's the maximum efficiency of those triggers or efficacy of those triggers is about 2 meters away. And so once again, a great setup. Here's the animal travel path. We see that the camera's a little bit away from that travel path and it's diagonal, so it's covering as much of that as possible. A lot of bad things with this one, but perpendicular, not getting any of that travel path, not at least enough, and it's directly on it. And so that's also a negative. So red X for that, green smiley face. Here's just an example. The area of focus is the service road. This camera is a good solid 2 meters back from it. That's an excellent setup. Here's another example. Our friendly, awesome photo, but not the best camera setup for us. All right, the next thing you want to do is what we call setting the stage for your camera. We want to, right here, keep the stage as natural as possible, but there are a few things that you can do to make sure that you don't get 30,000 photos on your camera. And the biggest thing is right here. You want to clear any brush that might be in the way. We have permission from the Forest Service to clear anything with our hands. So as long as you don't use a saw or any type of equipment, you are allowed to remove vegetation from the site. Really try to be conscientious with this. Don't get crazy out there. Like I said, you want to keep the stage as natural as possible, but if there's like grass that's really swaying in front of the camera or anything like that, you do have the right to remove that so that it's not going to set off the camera a bunch of times. I've done this plenty of times, and it can really go really far in saving your camera's memory and making sure that you don't get thousands of photos. Like I said, large leaves, well, that's kind of an overstatement, but twigs, grass, they can result in a ton of false triggers when the sun heats them up and then they blow in the wind. You really want to watch out for that. But once again, you don't want to disturb the trail, if you can help it. Next thing, probably the most important part about setting up a camera is recording those spatial coordinates. We've never had an issue with this, but it's absolutely crucial that we have a GPS location for your camera. If we don't, we simply cannot use that data because we have no idea where that camera was at. And so it is absolutely crucial that you take a GPS point really before you do anything else. That's the first thing you'll see on the data sheet. It's the most important thing to fill out. And you want to go out to at least the 4th decimal point. Gaia goes out to the 5th, so you should be good there. Once again, this is where you locate the GPS point. Record that as soon as you can. It's just much easier to have that done and not forget about it. All right, and then you want to make sure all the settings are correct. I am going to go through step by step each one of these these cameras because they do have a little bit of ambiguities, but the general settings are all the same. So this table is in your packet. These are the settings that we are using for this camera study. These settings have been replicated for 3 straight years now, and so these ones work well for us, and we're really happy with them. The only ones that you have to change are these ones right here: capture number, name, interval, sensor, and clock. And hopefully you actually won't even need to change this throughout the entire study. I have programmed all of the cameras here in the office, and they all have the correct settings right now. You only have to keep this in mind if your camera, for whatever reason, the settings get reset. And I'll talk about some things that can happen that reset your camera, but these are the things to think about. Things that could reset your camera. If that happens, these are the settings, sorry, to reset them to. This is also, once you set up your camera, is where you'll perform your walk test, which is the detection distance calculation. You can see your data sheet for more information if you are interested in how we do this, but I'll walk you through it once again how to do this. If you have an aggressor camera, which is, I think all of the cameras from 2019 were aggressor cameras. When you open them up, this is what it will look like in the inside. And what you'll see is when you turn it on to setup mode, there's an indicator light that will flash. And you'll see it flashing. That flash is indicative of any time the camera would be taking a photo if it were in the on position. And so you'll see that indicator light blink anytime the camera would be taking a photo. And so what you have to do with your walk test is put that camera up on the tree. If you're by yourself, unfortunately, you do have to tie it to the tree, roughly in the same place you would put it on setup mode, close the camera, and then diagonally walk along your travel path until that light turns off. That means the camera can no longer detect you, and in that position that you're in, it would no longer take a photo of you. That's important that we record that distance. And we don't need it to be exact. It never has needed to be exact in any type of research setting. So you just walk it off. And so it's just normal steps. It doesn't have to be giant steps. It doesn't have to be baby steps, but just walk it off. There's some definite variability in that. And I totally get that. But you just walk that off and you record that number, and that's your detection distance. So that's the number of paces that your camera can actually detect something that moves through it. And so you're going to want to record that. Like I said, if you have the aggressor cameras, you're going to do it this way, where the indicator light goes. If you have core cameras, it has to be done a different way because they no longer have the indicator light. And I'll tell you about that when we go through the cameras. All right, so once the camera's in the lockbox, the settings are ready to go. Go ahead and switch that camera to on, and then put that camera in the lockbox, close the lockbox, and mount your camera at knee height to the tree. This is a really good example of what the total setup will look like. The camera trap will go in this security case, then the security case gets locked to the tree, and then you want to make sure that the lock cable isn't flapping in front of the camera and causing all types of disturbance, because that can set off the camera like crazy. And so there's a hole in each security case that you can conveniently slide that little excess lock cable, in through that little hole, and that's a really great setup. So this is actually an excellent setup. I know it's on a fake tree in a convention center or whatever, but this is a great setup. They need to remember to grab their keys, but other than that, everything looks great. And remember, the above figures that we showed you, a really well-placed twig, it can go a long way when you're setting up a camera trap, and it can really help that angle of the sensor. So here's just a good example. We've got a really sloped terrain. We put a shimmy stick in there. It's parallel with the ground. This is a great camera setup. Same with here, great camera setup. And then check and recheck that camera position. 5 minutes or 10 minutes of rechecking where your camera's looking could be the difference between 300 awesome wildlife photos and 30,000 terrible grass photos. And so really kind of check that position, keep looking at it. Here's an example of what that would look like. My wife, bless her soul, she's had to go out with me on far too many camera checks. And on this occasion, we had a pretty terrible stage that we had to spend about 30 minutes setting for us. We had to knock down all this grass in this area. And so you can tell she was super happy about that. But it just goes to show you that she knew the camera was in the wrong position. So she's standing at where I wanted to be focusing the camera. She's noticing that the center of the camera is right here, and she's telling me to move it. And so this is a great example of basically moving your camera out of the way, or making sure it's in a good position. It's always good if you have a two-person team for this. One person's the one that's actually adjusting the camera. The other person's saying, no, it needs to go more this way, so on and so forth. But spend that extra time. Once you think you have it in a good position, walk out to it. Check the camera. Is it looking directly at you? walk back, check it out, get at eye level, really spend that time to look at it. That can make all the difference in where your camera's actually focusing on. All right, next thing is before you leave, oh man, for the love of God, sorry, but before you leave, keys should be recovered. Last year, I set a new record for the amount of distance that I had to retrack because I left keys in a lock. I got done with a 12-mile hike that was both up and back, and I get back to my car, realize I forgot the keys all the way back up the camera, so I did a 24-mile hike that day. It's really kind of the worst thing ever to forget your keys. You will be given a wristband that your key is attached to. I highly recommend, I've started doing this and it's helped a ton. Do not take that wristband off basically the entire time you're setting up the camera. From the moment you unlock the lock, just keep that wristband on there. It ensures that that key's not going anywhere. Keys are off the most commonly misplaced item, so really goes a long way to not misplace your keys so you don't have to go right back up to that site and re-grab them. All right, and then before you leave a site, you've got everything recovered. Before you leave your site, that's when you would use that site information placard. This is what the placard look like. Some of you will have this. It's 100% random. I didn't do like the first 25 cameras. I just randomly placed them into folders because I didn't want to give anybody any type of special treatment. But if you have a placard, it's this plastic little spot. This is what it looks like on the front. This is what it looks like on the bottom. This is vitally important. We have saved data from so many cameras that if their date and time gets reset for whatever reason, or you forget to check it before you leave the camera, if you have this placard and you have shown this placard to the camera, we have a reference date and a reference time, and then of course the name of the site. We can go back into the system and regather all that data. Even if the date and time on the camera is incorrect, we have a reference, we can change all of it to the correct date and time. So that's what this placard's for. You're going to fill out the date, fill out the time, and fill out the site ID. If you don't have the placard, you don't have to fill out the rest of this. You can bring out a notepad, you can write on the back of your data sheet, you can write on the back of your camera installations instructions, on the back of your folder. It doesn't matter what you use, as long as you show this to the camera before you leave the site so that we know the date, the time, and the camera that you just set up if for whatever reason your camera settings get reset during the process. If we have this, we can recover all of that data. Another thing you'll notice, if you have the placard, you'll have a big reminder on the back of it. We set our cameras so that they have an interval of 15 seconds. What that means is that anytime a camera is triggered, it's going to take a series of photos, then it's going to shut off completely for 15 seconds. And nothing you would do would trigger that camera. And the reason we do that is it's the research like recommended time, but that's because a lot of times you'll actually have like a moose or a deer sit in front of your camera, and if you don't have any interval, you get thousands of photos. If you have that interval, you don't get as many, and so that's why we do that. But what that means is if you're setting up your placard and it takes a photo of you as you're like in the process of, you know, bringing that placard over to the camera, it won't get the photo of the actual placard unless you wait for at least 15 seconds before leaving the site. I recommend, 30 to a minute, but at least 15 seconds. Show that placard to that camera for at least 15 seconds to ensure that you get that photo taken. Most of the time the settings are correct, and so it doesn't really matter if we have this placard or not, but every now and then you get a camera that's saved because it had the camera settings were off, but we had the placard. So it's really important that you get that. Here's some just important notes before we go into the data sheets. A blue light on your camera, I think for both models, indicates that your batteries are critically low, and that's meaning maybe you have a day left at most. And so you really want to change your batteries before you get to this point, but if you do see a blue indicator light, no need to panic. It's just the batteries are super low. This is either because the batteries were low quality or the SD card filled up pretty quickly. 32 gigabyte SD card can actually hold more like 30,000 photos, not 15,000 photos. And so what typically happens, you'll open up the camera, realize it's full, and that's why your batteries were drained. Another thing, please, please, please do not share the images from the camera study on any social media site without permission. This is for two reasons, especially if you have individuals, vehicles, humans of any sort. Privacy, illegal, let's not do that. But if you want to share a really cool animal photo, the reason you need permission before is that 2 years ago, I filled out a National Geographic grant, and I actually won it. And so I'm technically one of their explorers now. And what that means is basically they have rights to all of my media sources before I do. And so we can't share anything from the cameras until I get it passed off with them. So if you have an awesome photo, it's like a 5-minute process. Just send me and say, hey, I've got this really cool photo I want to post. And then I will just check with them. It's like an automated process. It doesn't take very long. And then you're good to go and you can post that. But without that permission, I can technically get in trouble from them. I don't know what that would mean, but probably don't want to get on their bad side. Never insert or remove a memory card while the camera is on. That's the quickest way to reset those settings. So if you just want to keep your settings the way they are and that date and time correct, the best way to reset that is to accidentally remove the memory card when the camera is on the on or the setup position. You want that camera off when you remove the memory card. I'm not even going to tell you how to erase the memory card, so let's just not do that. That's the data, and so without the data, then that camera's not going to be used. And so let's not erase the memory card. In wet weather, try to keep the camera dry as possible. These things were made for the outside; they can handle it. If you see the rubber seal is damaged, let me know. If not, they should be fine. Make sure the camera lens and everything is clean. This is really just like if there's physical like mud or whatever on the sensor, go ahead and clear that off. Remember blowing foliage as it can trigger the camera, and then remember the little note about direct sunlight. Okay, so this is a how to use Bushnell cameras. We're not going to go through this video. Instead, I'm going to show you. So I'm going to put on my gloves here. Okay. All right. Okay, so we have our camera again here. I'm going to walk through the whole thing again, sorry. So we've got our core camera. It opens up just the bottom part. Batteries come out by pressing this. Once again, it's kind of hard. Go ahead and yank it to get those batteries out. When you put it back in, you really want to hear that click. And so then when you open it up, the setup menu is exactly the same. There's an off, setup, and an on selection right here. To get to the settings, you click the setup menu. And this is how you do the detection distance with this camera. And so this camera, you'll notice what it's looking at is actually what the camera's looking at itself. And so you'll see that screen. That's what the actual camera is seeing. And so the detection distance in this case is you hook the camera up to the tree, or if you're with someone else, you put it up to the tree and you walk out to the farthest spot that the camera can actually see. And that's your recorded detection distance. So it's actually easier than using the indicator light. You can actually see what the camera's looking at, and you use that to go ahead and calculate the detection distance. The next thing you'll notice is to get to the menu, you click on the menu button that's right here, and that's how you cycle through the settings. To cycle through a setting, to go from one setting to the next, use the left and the right arrows. To cycle to change a setting, you use the up and the down arrows right here. And then to actually execute that change. So if you change a setting, you have to execute that change or it won't save. And so if you just change a setting and then move on to the next one without executing it, it's not going to save. And so to execute that change, you click the little execute button and it's right here in the middle. And so just cycling through these cameras, unfortunately, because they have that screen, the date and the time aren't displayed on the screen. And the last thing you have to do before you turn on a camera is check that the date and time are correct. So with these cameras, you do actually have to go into the menu, click on the date and time, verify that it's correct. This one is 12/13, correct date, so you're good. Go ahead and then go out and then turn the camera on. When you turn on either one of these cameras, you'll notice that there's a red indicator light right there. Can you see that? That light will go on for 10 seconds before it then arms. Once it arms, the camera won't make a sound, won't make any type of light at all, and it'll start taking photos. They're supposed to be as covert as possible. You want to make sure that you see that red indicator light and you want to watch it all the way through. That means that the camera's armed itself and it's now taking photos. All right, so then I'm going to turn the camera off, take it down. So that's using our new core cameras. They're supposed to be the top cameras on the market right now, so I'm excited to see how they work. They have the exact same qualifications, so detection distance, trigger speed as the previous model, so we're not biasing our results in any way. They're just supposed to be higher quality as far as battery life goes and stuff like that. So we'll give them a shot. Hopefully they go really well. That's how to navigate through the core cameras. You then put them back in their security case. To use the aggressor cameras, they're a little bit bigger. They take 8 batteries. Take it out of the security case right here. They take 8 batteries. They open up on the side like this. All right, just like that. You pop it open like that. And this is what you'll all typically have seen if you've participated before. They take 8 batteries. So if you have an aggressor camera, your packet that comes with the camera will have 8 instead of 6. The same settings apply though. When you go to the setup menu, it's on, setup, and off. The arrows, they'll either be right here like they are with the core camera, or they'll be along here. Same rules apply to go between settings, left and right. Change a setting, it's up and down. But what you'll notice is you can't see what the camera's looking at. You only see the date and time right here. This is good for right before you set up the camera. The date and time will be displayed, so you just put it on setup and then switch it to on. You'll notice that once you switch it to on, you'll see again that red indicator light for 10 seconds. You really want to make sure you watch that till completion. But to do your walk test, like I said before, when you click it on setup mode, so it's going to be on setup mode now, you'll see that it's on setup mode. It's ready to go. Settings are correct. Good, good, good. And you'll notice you see the red indicator light. That's the indicator light that's saying the camera would be taking photos right now if I were around. That's what that's doing. And so that's how you then can do the walk test with the red indicator light. Once you're done with that, you check the settings one more time, you flip it on. So that's how to use both of these cameras. If you have any questions, feel free to just contact me. I can walk you through it over the phone, and we can do that. But they do have very similar functionality. They work very similar to each other, but there are those little ambiguities. So that's how to set them up. I'm going to go ahead and reshare my screen now. Actually, before that, I'm going to show you one more video. This is a video of how to set up the camera. Let me share the screen real quick. I'm a big golf fan, so you see all my other suggested YouTube videos or watching Tiger Woods. I'm kind of pathetic. Anyway, so this is how you'd actually set up a camera.
Welcome to eMammal. My name is Dr. Stephanie Schuttler, and I am a scientist on the eMammal project. Today, I'm going to show you how to set up an eMammal camera trap to take photos for eMammal research. I will show you how to select an ideal location, set up a camera trap, and what kind of data needs to be taken during camera trap setup and breakdown. Look for an area within your site that is clear in at least one direction and where there are not a lot of people or cars. If you have been assigned a specific GPS coordinate for your project, find the best location within 50 meters of that point.
We have 100
Do
meters.
not point cameras at roads, picnic areas, playgrounds, or other areas of high use. If you have to place your camera trap in a high traffic area where there are people and roads, such as neighborhoods or schools, point your camera trap away from the road and towards the lowest traffic area. Choose a straight tree or secure post that the lock can fit around. Avoid trees that are less than 6 inches in diameter. Do not choose a tree that is slanted because the photos will be crooked. Do not choose a stump as the camera can be easily removed. And finally, try not to put your camera at large logs, other large trees, large rocks, or buildings. All of these things can block the camera. Place the camera on the tree at about knee height. Make sure the camera is parallel to the ground and it is facing right side up. If you are on a slope, set up the camera so that it captures photos across the slope. If you have to place your camera on a slope, put a shim or sticks behind it to angle it up or down to make the camera parallel with the ground. Lock your camera until it is snug on the tree so that it will not move during the entire time of your camera trap deployment. As you tighten, the camera may move. Double check to make sure that it is still at knee height and straight. Several types of locks are used in eMammal, and if you are not sure how yours works, check out our video demonstrating locks on the eMammal website.
We all use the same
Don't forget
lock.
to take the key from the lock and tuck in the loose ends of the lock so it doesn't blow in the wind and in front of the camera. The walk test allows you to check your camera trap setup to make sure that you've positioned your camera trap correctly. It also allows you to measure the maximum distance that your camera trap can detect you at. Put the camera on walk test mode and walk out from the camera in a zigzag pattern. You will see the red light blink on the outside of the camera when it detects you. Go as far as you can and stop where you last saw the light. Measure this distance in meters.
We don't have
If
to
your
use
detection
it. We can just
distance
walk
is
it off.
short, such as less than 8 meters, you can adjust your camera position to improve your detection distance. If you are not getting a good detection distance, you may not have chosen a good site and may have to try a different tree. Once you have a good detection distance, fill out your data sheet for the deployment. You will write the name.
All right, so that's just basically the gist of it. The rest is their data sheet, and they use a different data sheet than us. So I will go ahead and pull up our presentation again. And so, yeah, that's basically the biggest thing to think about is, you know, exactly what they said. Really want to consider the location of your camera, consider the terrain that you're setting it up, conduct the walk test, fill out your data sheet, recover those keys. All right, so if you cannot make a setup check or takedown for whatever reason, it is expected that you can. Totally understand life happens, especially in these crazy, crazy times. So if you want to, you can just let me know, hey, I can't make this check. Please let me know as soon as possible. I will go out there and check the camera for you. I have no problem doing it. I love doing it, actually. I'll set up your camera. I'll take it down. But I need some notice because I am doing my own field work during this process, and I'm also coordinating with all the other volunteers. So if you can contact me as soon as possible, like if you know you're going to miss something, let me know. But at least by the Thursday of that designated week. So if you can't make your, you know, your rotation 3 check, if you can let me know by at least the Thursday of when that check's supposed to be completed, I can get out there and make sure it's checked for you. But like I said, it is expected that you complete all of them. It really helps us if we're able to do that. But we understand if you can't, if you just let us know and let me know specifically, I handle all of that stuff during the field season. All right, so we only have one more thing to go through. We're going to go through it super quick so we can get to the session 2 Q&A, and it's the actual data sheets themselves. And so these are going to be what the data sheets look like. They all look very similar, but we're going to go through their little ambiguities. We're going to start with the setup data sheet. Here's what the setup data sheet looks like. You'll always have this little reminder here. Read that. But what will change is this. So they're all going to be in packets. You're going to have a setup, a check, and a takedown in a packet for site 1, a setup and a check for site 2, a setup and a check and whatever for site 3. And so this is the only thing that's going to change on the side of the packet for the setup data sheets, but it will always say visit 1. When you go through that, the first thing you're going to see is camera station information. You have the date, you have the site ID, and then you have your research team. This is month, day, year. This would be an example of it. Please put the full name of any person participating. We're trying to keep track of that. We're trying to quantify those hours. We really want to make sure that you're getting credit for the total amount of hours that you're giving us, and we can't make a profile for you if you don't know your full name. So if you're bringing someone else out there, please put their full name so we can keep track of you. Next thing is your GPS location. Like I said, you're going to find that from your Gaia app right there. Go ahead and throw that in there. So at least the 4th decimal point. The next one is the time. So this is, you're going to get credit, volunteer credit, whether it's for dedicated 100 hours or just normal volunteer credit, or you're doing the America the Beautiful Pass. You're going to get credit from the moment you leave your house to the moment you're back home. And so that's how we keep track of that. So if you are a dedicated hunter or you are trying to get volunteer hours, this is the way that we assign those hours to you. So please keep track of your hours that way. It's from when you leave home to when you're back home. You record it like that. The next thing is detection characteristics. This is what I said when we're specifying whether we set it up on a hiking trail, a road, a drainage, which is anywhere where the water's coming through, a ridge, a wildlife or game trail. This can be all that apply. You can definitely circle more than one thing for this. So you might be on a hiking trail, but you might also have it set up on a drainage or something like that, or a ridge. You can circle all that apply. The detection distance is the number of paces that you then put in from the camera to your nearest impediment. So you're going to go ahead and record that based on the walk test, or with the core cameras, you're going to see what the actual camera's looking at, and you'll record that on there. Habitat characteristics, very general. We're only looking at just kind of where your camera's located in, just retrospect to just the general idea. So you have conifer, deciduous. I get that gamble falls within that, but we do have gamble or scrub oak as its own category.
sagebrush, cliff edge, riparian. Once again, circle all that apply. Here's some conifer forest is anything with needles, basically. It's your pines, your firs, your spruces. Deciduous trees are usually found along water. They require a lot more water because they're broad leaves, and they just transpire a lot more. They're the ones that change color, so you'll definitely be able to distinguish between your deciduous and conifer forest. Gamble oak, if you spent any time in Utah, you're very familiar with scrub oak. And so this is basically on their lower elevations, kind of the foothills. It really dominates the vegetation in these areas. Sagebrush, you won't really come across a ton of it, but you might if you're in like the higher elevations in these areas. There's also some pretty good sagebrush patches in Parley's Canyon. And then riparian is anywhere near a water's edge. So that can be running water or it can be a lake. Anything for us that's riparian is just near the water's edge. If you have a place like Liberty Park, Liberty Park's not on our camera survey, but if you did, it doesn't really fall into any one of these categories, maybe riparian because it's along a little lake there. You can go ahead and use the write-in option right there. You can use the write-in option to say Liberty Park, because I get that a lot of the Salt Lake City locations aren't going to be within one of these classifications. All right, so here would be an example of a spot. Let's say we set up the camera right down here. When you are classifying your landscape type, it is roughly 100 meters around your landscape type. And so it doesn't include all of this over here or this aspen stand that's up here. It's just 100 meters within your actual camera site. And so for this, we would mark conifer forest and riparian because we're along the water's edge and we've got conifer forest right up there and it falls within our 100 meters. The next one is vegetation cover. These are circling one of the above options. You have vegetation cover in percentages. And when we say vegetation cover, this is more canopy cover. So think of it more as shade cover, basically. And so an example of 0 to 25 would be the Jordan River Parkway. There's not a lot going on in that area. There's not a ton of shade. And so we get that as 0 to 25. 25 to 50 would be kind of your higher areas, maybe even your like alpine areas. Those would get you 25 to 50% shade cover. There's shade in the area, but it's not fully covered. 50 to 75 is kind of your classic hiking trail in Utah, really, where a lot of it's covered in shade, but you still have that sunlight peeking through every now and then. And then 75 is your really dense aspen and gamble oak stands, where really there's almost no sunlight that's reaching the ground. There are very little sunlight that's reaching the ground. Those are going to be your 75 to 100 classifications. So if we go back to this one, this works better when everybody's in person. I can't hear your responses. But if we were to estimate what it would be here, remember that this one looks very similar to this right here. This is a 25 to 50 classification for us. All right, the next one is site photographs. So we are doing something novel that has actually never been done before. We're just getting around to analyzing these data from 2018. There's so much of it. But instead of conducting a full understory vegetation survey at the site, what you're doing instead is we're having you take photos at the site, and then we are using the relative greenness from each pixel in those photos to classify relative understory density in relation to all the other sites. And we're basically using this information, and then I did a bunch of actual vegetation surveys last year, and we're looking at those reference surveys in response to the photos and seeing if there's a correlation between the two. Haven't got validation that this method works yet because I haven't done that analysis, but we're going to keep doing it until we do have validation one way or the other. And so what you do here is when you're at the site, you simply take a photo in the forward, behind, left, and right facing directions of your camera, and then you send those photos to me. So it's just a check off. Check, 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 check. All right, and then the next thing is your radial survey. So this is how we get that wildlife and that development index. This is how we create those based on these measurements that you do. So let's say your camera's right here, smack dab in the middle. Your radial survey is going to be just a continuous survey out from that camera in a 50-meter radius in every direction. And what you're going to do when you're conducting that radial survey is you're going to mark whether you've detected or haven't detected any sign of human garbage, tracks, pet sign, or anything else. And then you're also going to record any wildlife tracks, scat, carcasses or bones, or anything else that you filled out. So you're going to use that survey to mark presence or absence. This works better in person, me showing you how to do this, but if you imagine basically spiraling out from your camera in 50 meters in each direction and then recording whatever you see in those spots, that's how to conduct these radial surveys. They're fairly easy to do. They don't take a ton of time, but if you're noticing that you're getting zeros every time you go up for wildlife activity, highly recommend potentially moving that camera, because there might be a reason why there's no wildlife there. They're just not going into that area. All right, so like I said, this is in the immediate vicinity within 50 meters of the camera placement. It's based on detection or non-detection. Did you find it or did you not? You're going to replicate this 3 times, and so we can use that to estimate detection probability for each one of these parameters. Gives us a really nice and precise covariate that we can use in our analysis. So here's some examples of human activity. You've got garbage, you've got human tracks. Quick lesson from the same time from last year. We're going over time a little bit, so we're going to go really fast through this. But here's the difference between dogs and coyote. Really, it kind of depends on the dog, but this is a generalized example. But you'll notice some big things right off the bat if you're trying to identify between coyote and dog. Biggest thing is how far apart the pads typically are on a dog, whereas with coyote, they're fairly close together. And even those top pads actually sit basically right on top of those bottom pads like that. And you don't typically see that with dogs. And also with coyote, their 2 pads right here are typically filled in or even come out a little bit. And so it looks more like a triangle on that bottom pad than your typical little lobed bottom pad right there. Another big thing to look for is with coyote tracks. This is a really good example. I mean, perfect coyote print. You can see this little X that is formed because those pads are so close to each other. A lot of people also call it a star, so you can kind of see this star right here. That's not present in a dog photo, so this is a really good dog print. You don't really see that X. It's nothing continuous. Pads are really far apart. The front pads don't sit on top of the bottom pads. They're farther away. And then you see those 2 clear lobes. That's a very clear dog track right there. Here's another coyote track. You see that connected lobe right down there. Those bottom pads, those top pads are literally sitting right on top of them. You can see this looks like a starfish pretty well. That's what you're looking for to differentiate between those 2. To get between dog and cat tracks, the biggest thing is that the claws are typically not out with felines. They're retracted into them. And so you won't see the claw marks with a cat. You'll also see that the heel pad right here does have those pretty clear lobes, 3 of them, and the 2 on top, whereas with dog tracks, you don't see that. So that's a pretty clear sign as well. But those are how you're going to kind of do that. I get that that's ambiguous. I get that that's difficult. But usually it's easy to sort out if it's a dog or if it's a coyote or something like that, because dogs are usually associated with humans as well. And so you typically find them in unison. And coyote poop looks a lot different than dog poop because there's hair in it. So you'll really notice that a lot more. But yeah, try your best to really identify it. If you have any questions and you have service, send me a photo. I can help you out with it. But yeah, do your best on that. I get this sometimes it's a little bit off. The final thing is if there's a road that you can see from your camera. This doesn't matter if it's really far off or if it's right next to you, but you can't actually see it. If you can see it, record the number of vehicles that go across at your site within a 5-minute span. This is your vehicle traffic assessment, and we're going to use that data. But if you can't see it, obviously you can't get an accurate measure of the total number of vehicles, and so you don't record it. You put NA or unable to measure, and that's totally awesome. All right, so there we go. This would be an example from Red Butte. There's research equipment and human tracks in the area. No vehicles, obviously. And then my wildlife activity, this is what I recorded. I also found scratch marks. If you find anything that's not included in here, feel free to write that in the notes. And then the last thing is just your checklist. This is for you. This is just to make sure that you're doing everything that you're supposed to. So are the batteries in place and charged? Is the SD card in place? Are the settings verified? Date and time correct? Did you set the stage? Did you take those photos? If you could you assess the traffic? Did the camera blink when you turned on? Was the position correct? Is it out of the view if sun or swaying vegetation? Did you complete the data sheet? Are those labels? There's labels on our cameras. You'll see them when I hand them to you. Are they still attached to the camera or are they flapping off? Did you display your placard or whatever you used? And then finally, recover those keys. That's vitally important. All right, The check data sheets look exactly the same, except now it says check up here. The reminder's a little different. And now the site will change, but the visit will always be number 2. The only thing that's different on the check data sheets is the checklist has a little more information for you to fill out. You have to just include whether the camera's functioning, what level the battery's at. Is it low, which is no bars remaining? Is it critical, which is that blue light flashing? Or is it good, which means there's at least 1 bar? How many photos are on the SD card? You should be able to see this by when you open up the camera and you put it on menu. The first thing you'll see is the date and time for both cameras, and well, the date and time for the aggressor, but for both cameras, you'll also see a number divided by another number. That first number is the actual number of photos that are on the SD card. So you'll go ahead and record that right there in that spot. This is just here. If you have more than 10,000 photos when you go out to a check, you might want to consider moving that camera because the camera's getting bombarded right now. It's taking way too many photos. If not, though, just go ahead and click no. If you choose to remove that camera, there is a spot for your new GPS location on the back of the check data sheet. Then you can record that right here. With the takedown data sheets, everything is exactly the same, except the checklist is smaller now because you don't have to worry about like doing all these other things. It's all just basically taking it down. These are vitally important. They get their little golden rectangle. That means just please make sure you're recording those. We're tracking that as well. We want to get an idea of the average number of photos each one of our cameras take, how well they're working, are they functioning throughout the entire rotation, are the batteries staying at a good level. We want to make sure that all of that's in a good position moving forward from year to year. And so if you can record that, it helps us keep track of it. And if there's any changes we need to make, this is how we access those changes. All right, with those site photographs, because it's going to be a little bit difficult to do this year, I'm having everyone just send them to me, whether it's through a text or an email. Send all of your site photos directly to me, and I will then put them on a global spreadsheet. And so if you're texting me, please include the site name and the visit number in your text, or I won't be able to tell where these photos are from. Here's my number. If you're emailing me, please include the name and the visit number in the subject line. That's probably the easiest way for me to then take those photos, directly put them into the correct spot. So that's where you're going to send those photos. So after you do it, it's usually best when you get home, then send me those photos, and I can then keep track of them and make sure they're in the right place. Cool. You'll also see this on the back of your takedown. Please make sure everything is ready for the next rotation. Once you take down a card, you'll notice there's 3 SD cards. Those SD cards match up with the sites. So site 1 will go with site 1 SD card, so on and so forth. Please make sure you switch out your SD cards. It's really difficult to differentiate between the sites after the fact. Make sure the batteries are either recharged or juiced. If you want to use your own batteries and you have rechargeables, you can do that. Just make sure they're juiced. We have switched away from that just because they weren't working enough for us. And if you have any questions or comments, let me know. But also, when you finish a check, please contact me. Or even if you're planning on going out, it's going to be a requirement that you contact me. I keep a big spreadsheet of every single camera site and every single setup, check, and rotation and takedown. And I check off each individual person throughout the entire field season. And so this is what I was saying when you're going to be hearing from me. If I don't hear from you that you're either planning on setting up your camera, checking your camera, or taking down your camera at some point during that week, or you don't contact me before Wednesday, I'll send you a rough email just saying, hey, please remember to contact me, or please remember to check your camera. And then starting Friday through the rest of the weekend, I will be sending you individual texts. And I hate to nag, but it's proven to be the best way to ensure that everything goes swimmingly. So if you don't want those nagging texts, or if you don't want that nagging email, at the beginning of the week, just send me an email or send me a text saying, hey, I'm planning on checking my camera this week, and I'll go ahead and check you off the list. So you don't have to have already set it up. Even if you're planning on doing it, that will count. But yeah, I stick to my word. I really will contact you. So please let me know beforehand so that we don't have to do that. All right, really quick, last few things. It should take a couple minutes, and then we'll get into that Q&A. Some etiquette. We'll go over some do's and don'ts with this camera trapping project. So let's, don'ts with 2 apostrophes. I keep forgetting to change that. Anyway, so some do's. Do contact me after each check. it's a lot easier. And that's setup, check, and takedown. That's basically what I meant by this. Just contact me after each time you go out. If you don't, I will. And so it's probably just better if you contact me. Do talk about the project with your friends and family. I'd love to get more people involved in this. The more the merrier. So if if they don't want to participate in fieldwork, but they want to look through photos, we have a ton of photos that need to be looked through. So there's always ways to get involved. Do let me know if you cannot make a check like we talked about. Please give me some notice. It's totally cool if you can't do it. But if I have some time, then I can make sure it's done instead of kind of cutting it super close to the end of the week. And then some don'ts, like we said, don't share the photos of individuals or human activity. We don't want to get in trouble. We want this project to continue, so please don't do that. Please don't share photos of animals without my permission, just because of Nat Geo. The first year this wasn't an issue, but this year we just have to make sure that we're doing it correctly. Please don't share the location of your camera with others. If you're going out with family members, of course, that's totally cool. But we want these cameras to be as covert as possible for as long as possible until they're taken down. And then lastly, please don't mix batteries in the camera. I broke 3 cameras this year accidentally using the wrong batteries. I didn't even mean to do it. I had lithium batteries and alkaline batteries in the same camera, and it shorted out my camera and just died. And this has happened before. If you mix like alkaline and rechargeable batteries, this is just a warning. Use the same type of battery. If you want to switch out your batteries for lithiums, you can do that, but just keep all lithiums in there. Same thing with rechargeables. If you're going to switch them out for rechargeables, switch all of them out. Don't keep any of the alkalines still in there. I learned this the hard way. So please make sure you don't mix the batteries. And then lastly, we are always looking for new funding sources. This project's done really well at keeping keeping us ready to go and moving forward, but that doesn't mean that we're, not looking for constant funding sources. The longer this project lasts, the more vital that data set becomes, the more important that data set becomes. So if we can keep it going from year to year, that's great. If you're aware of any grant sources that we don't think we're looking for, please let us know. Last year, we won a grant through Terracon, which was fantastic. Andy King helped us write that grant, and it was awesome. And so that was something we would have never known existed if we didn't, and Alicia also helped us write that grant. And so it was just awesome. If you have anything like that, we always are happy to look into that. We're always looking for funding. And Wild Utah Project has done so much for this work that any help that they can get, we're always happy to pursue any type of funding sources. Really quick, here's the pickup list. If you haven't already filled it out, please fill it out. If you're having trouble, seems like some people might have trouble pulling this up, you can contact me or Sarah or Mary, I'd imagine. And we can add your name. You just let us know when you're available. The time slots run from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. I can do earlier or later too if you need to. Just let me know. But please add your name to that. It's the only way we can get our cameras to you. And then when you show up, let me know you're here and I'll run all that equipment out to you. I won't be able to do that though unless you fill out the waiver. So please fill out the waiver. If so, I'll just make you fill it out there, and we'll just go ahead from there. And then with that, thank you so much for participating. We could not do this without you. I'm expecting another great year. I'm blown away. This is my favorite part of the project. So I'm pretty devastated that I'm not able to actually see everybody and get together. I love the in-person meetings. And so it really kind of sucks that we're having to do it through a webinar, but thank you so much for participating. Really can't stress enough how important I feel like this project was and how vital you are to this project. And so thanks again for listening. And Mary and Sarah, if you have anything you want to add, this is great. If not, then we'll go ahead and move into the second question and answer session to kind of wrap up this study. So yeah, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, this is the best time to ask.
Thank you so much, Austin. Yeah, keep the questions coming in the Q&A box. We've been trying to stay on top of those. So if any questions came up during that, that was kind of a heavy section going through the installation, the timeline, and the data sheet. So We're happy to field those questions. A couple of things I just wanted to bring up just to kind of clarify for people. I think we have almost 80% return volunteers, which is just phenomenal. So a lot of you are really familiar with this process, but some of you, this is your first year. And so if all of this felt like just a crush of information, part of the reason that might have felt a little more overwhelming is because this year you don't have your packet of information about your site in front of you. So just know that once you fill out the waiver and sign up for a curbside pickup time for your equipment, in addition to the camera, the case for the camera, the lockbox, and the key, you'll also get this folder. And on that folder, there's a label with the name of your site and the location for the 3 places you'll be moving that camera to. And additionally, all the details of that field form and the instructions for installation are printed out in that packet for you. So you're able to revisit this video anytime and the training videos we've shared with that packet of information right in front of you. So if there's anything you're feeling uncomfortable with, that's an option, but additionally, you can always reach out to us. The other thing I wanted to mention is, Austin shared our challenges getting the laminated placards done this year. I think we're going to go ahead and add a PDF of that information of the placard that you're holding up for an image, the date, the name of your site, and the visit number, the basics that we need. But you can always just write that on a piece of paper, and that's fine. But we'll also provide that as a link on the sign-up sheet. So you could print that out for all, 6 or 9 visits that you make. So you just have copies of that in your folder that you take out with you. So we'll make that an option for you as well. It sounded like a couple people, it might be a Mac thing, we're having difficulty accessing the sign-up sheet. If that's the case, Austin mentioned this, but you have Austin's email. You also have Sarah's email in the chat. I can add mine as well. If you email any of us, we can just schedule time for you if for whatever reason you're not accessing that sign-up sheet. And then one more thing I wanted to mention is as you're out in the field, some of you will be in the foothills, some of you might be more in a neighborhood or in a more urban area. If someone approaches you, hopefully maintaining their social distancing, but if somebody approaches you and asks you what you're doing, your camera case, the lockbox to the camera is going to have a label on it, and it has a University of Utah label. It describes a little bit about how there's a phone number and an email you can contact to be a part of the project, or you can see the photos. So it's a very inclusive email if people want to learn more about the project. And I think it's because of that label that we have had a record few number of cameras stolen or damaged, because people see that it's a research project, that it's a community project, and it's not somebody just trying to gather information on themselves or for themselves, or encroaching on somebody's favorite place. So hopefully those labels will still do that service, and it also will allow lend some credibility to you if somebody asks, hey, what are you doing with this camera? So you can always kind of show them that label. You can even read off the phone number, email on them for them, again, maintaining your social distance if that were to happen. I think that's it for the just things that I wanted to mention. There was a great mention in the Q&A from Jessica, and I was hoping, Austin, that you could follow up on this. Yeah. So Jessica says that she's not sure if we've touched on this. I think we've talked about memory card settings a bit already.
We didn't touch on this though, so this is a really good point.
Okay, yeah, if you could give some discussion to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Mary, for that. And also feel free to just throw my name out there to anybody that potentially gives you grief, or throw the name of the project, because there's a lot of online resources that they can access. And so if anyone's giving you grief for whatever reason, you can just refer them to either me or to the Wasatch Wildlife Watch project. There's plenty of resources that they could access really right there on the spot if they're not going to let you access a certain spot or anything like that.
But to get to Jessica's question, all of these memory cards, they do have a lock setting on them or a switch on them. And this can be really annoying when you set up a camera and it's accidentally in the lock position. It doesn't allow you to basically take any photos, or it's really just kind of a pain to, it won't even read the SD card. So you just want to make sure that it's in the unlock position. It's on the left side of the SD card, and it's a little switch that goes up and down. It's actually quite difficult to move the switch down. I think that's for a reason. But if it's in the down position, you'll see that it's in the lock position. All of them currently are in the unlock position. They should stay and remain within the unlock position throughout the entire season. But if for whatever reason it moves for, or it's accidentally switched into there, please make sure it's unlocked before you go ahead with it. But yeah, no, that's a really good, great question, Jessica. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, but they can get bumped, and you're in a bit of a pickle once that happens. But basically, just switch it back into the unlock position, and you should be good to go. Let's see. I don't see if there are any other questions. Please, if you do have any questions, especially if you're a first timer, this is the best time to ask them. We might not get a ton of, I guess you can call this kind of virtual in-person interaction this year. I'm always available over phone and email, but if you have a question, there's a very good chance that someone else out there does as well. This is probably the best time to ask it. Let's see.
While we're asked, or we might just wait a few minutes to see if anybody else asks questions, but, and it's really great. We're getting some feedback from our sometimes third-year participants, sometimes second-year participants. People are really excited about participating again. We got a question about SD cards, which reminds me to say every year we have a thank you event where we ask people to bring their equipment and hand it in, and we have food and we share updates and photos from the field season, and it's usually a really fun time. And we're so grateful the Natural History Museum shares their space with us. They host those events, as well as allowing the community science volunteers to go see the museum once the event is over. And it's just lovely. So I really hope that we'll be able to do that. We obviously don't have a crystal ball, but we're hopeful that we have the possibility of having that event maybe in end of August, maybe September. And if we can't have it then, we'll have it at some point, because we really want to show our appreciation to you all. And if that doesn't happen, then we'll just do what we did for the curbside pickup, and we'll schedule times that work for you to drop off, or we can even pick up from a location that you're willing to share with us. If you want to leave things on your front porch, or we set up a different type of drop off, maybe it'll be at our offices again. So we'll just troubleshoot that depending on what's happening in the hopefully post-COVID era.
Awesome. Yeah. Let's see. Jacob mentioned you had mentioned that roughly 50 cameras will be used in the fall as well. Will these be more of the urban cameras? And I'm asking because I'm interested in continuing the project. Awesome. Well, that's great to hear. Thank you for your interest. It really depends. The vast majority, I think, instead of having the majority of cameras in the summer that are Central Wasatch cameras, a lot of the cameras that will be set up in the fall will be our lower elevation Canyon cameras and the Salt Lake City cameras. So yeah, the vast majority of them will be the more urban cameras that we'll set up in the fall. And that's just to make sure that, there's no issues with snow. Let's see, any other questions? We got a few things in the chat. Good, it looks like everyone's at least getting a little bit better results with the spreadsheet to fill out your date and time. Awesome. Yeah, so we'll stick around until about 1 o'clock or so. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. And once again, thank you all for participating. I'm excited for a really great year. I'm happy that we've been able to put this together. Really, Mary and Sarah have done so much work to put this together and to make sure that we're still able to have a field season this year. and even providing Wild Utah Project as the place to come and pick up the cameras. Like, can't thank them enough. And really, there's been a ton that's gone into this, so we're super excited that 2020 is still going to happen, even with the crazy situations we're in.
Some folks might be interested. I think at the peak we had 48 participants, but we've consistently had around 45 people on the webinar. And I was really impressed. You know, people walked away at that long break, and almost everybody came back. And so again, we just really appreciate that, and know that this webinar will be recorded, and so you can revisit after the fact, but you also have those 5 training videos that Austin provided in advance of this. So you can always revisit the details.
Awesome.
And then while we're waiting for questions, I will say, if you're out there setting up cameras and you have any pictures of yourself setting things up or being part of the project, feel free to share those with us. We'd love to stay in contact with you as you're doing this. Yeah, we just like to see how it's going for you, so don't hesitate to send those over.
Awesome. All right, so I don't think there's any more questions. We're still getting a few more things on the chat, but oh, good to see you, Andy. Thank you. But yeah, I guess we can go ahead and close the meeting. And if anybody has any questions that they still want to ask, please just contact me. I am now in full Wasatch Wildlife Watch mode, and so this is now what I do 24/7. So it'll be coordinating with you guys, doing the field work, getting all that done. So I am at your beck and call, and really just don't hesitate to reach out to me, especially in these crazy times. Let's make sure that we can, get everything you need and that you're ready to go. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and sign off. So I look forward to another good year.